There was no climate component to this dilemma, Julia, so I couldn't even try and find one, post it on Twitter and pretend there was, but you know, that's
indeed.
life. Zuckerberg we're talking about.
Zuckerberg.
Yep.
Also, by the way, no doubt also this vote, there is going to be a vote in the Commons. Speaker Lindsay Hoyle has decided on Kemi Badenoch's call for the government to establish a national inquiry into grooming gangs. No doubt that will still be in the news as well, and plenty more besides.
Yep. Huge
thanks to Benedict Spence for joining us. Thank you as always. I know Ian Collins' show is going to be as rip-roaring brilliant as it always is. Lots more coming up. Do stay tuned. News up next. I'm done for the day. I'm Julia Holly-Brewer, and this is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon. Welcome to the home of common sense. Thank you to Julia. She's back tomorrow, of course, at 10 o'clock. Lots to get through in this section. We are going to focus a little bit as well on Meta boss Mark Zuckerberg saying he wants to restore free expression by ditching independent fact-checkers on Facebook and Insta as well, with users to add notes to posts that might be false or misleading. That's worked out really well on X, hasn't it? More on that in a couple of moments. Also, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has told MPs he remains opposed to holding an inquiry into the grooming gang scandal, arguing that victims want action now, not the delay of a further inquiry. Here's a unique idea. Why don't we have both? Like, let's have some action now and an inquiry as to why no single head has even rolled during this horrific chapter of our times. And the NHS is warning patients of two-day waits in A&E after 9 UK hospitals declared critical incidents due to an exceptionally high number of flu cases. We'll have the latest on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. When the Facebook story broke yesterday, I think we were on air, I think, when they first announced they were going to dilly-dally with the algorithms and get rid of the kind of fact-checker. Now, journalistically, when you first hear somebody say we're going to get rid of the fact-checker, you sort of, your ears prick up and go, well, that sounds a bit weird on the face of it. But, of course, Facebook's fact-checker worked very different to other fact-checkers, or maybe the one at the BBC, but you take the point. And it's thrown in to the spotlight the question, and obviously doing this for a living, I've got skin in the game, but I genuinely think this should be of interest to all of us as to where we're going to be getting our news and our information. Because at the moment, and it's not new entirely, but there's a new kind of credibility being added to the digital world, to social media, that was never really there before. It's a cacophony of information that flows out at 1,000 billion messages and items a second. And this is our go-to news outlet? Meta is getting rid of the independent fact-checkers, replacing them with the sort of X-style, X as in Twitter-style, community notes, which is where individuals can correct somebody's post. That in itself then creates another set of debates, usually, if you've ever followed that on Twitter, where someone's gone, no, that's absolutely not true. I think you'll find it was 1976 we had the hot summer. And then someone's then chips in, no, you say that, but it started in 75. And on it goes. Mark Zuckerberg said third-party moderators were too politically biased and it was time to get back to our roots of free expression. Let's have a little listen to what Mr. Zuckerberg said yesterday.
We're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. More specifically, we're going to get rid of fact-checkers and replace them with community notes, similar to X, starting in the US.
So there it is, all fine and dandy, but where is the line between fact-checking and fact-blocking? Where is the line between opinion and facts? And that's where the whole waters have got muddied. The move comes as Zuckerberg and other tech execs seek to improve relations with the US president to come, Donald Trump. He takes office, of course, in January. Trump and the Republican allies have criticised Meta for its fact-checking policy, calling it censorship of right-wing voices. Well, I think you have to be honest about this and say, yes, there clearly were some censorship of right-wing voices. Trump, and this is interesting, Trump is almost the instigator about fake news, his comments about fake news media, crooked organisations. The hashtag scum media became a thing. You may remember people now use the term, curious term, legacy media, which is used to sort of describe the mainstream, a pejorative, I think, which suggests that the mainstream is dead and the real news exists elsewhere. Platforms like Twitter. Zuckerberg has sensed the mood and jumped into bed, really, metaphorically, with Musk on this one. And one assumes this is to try and ring-fence himself from the iron fist of the next president. The fact that some of the greatest whoppers we've ever read have come from Trump itself, and even Musk, seems to elude people. Many see Musk and X as the person who gave them their voices back, people who claimed they were censored. Now, I get it, by the way, because it is frustrating. When the old Twitter banned President Trump, it was the most bonkers and dangerous thing I think I'd ever seen. Look, whoever's holding the keys to Twitter made a largely political decision. I know Trump wasn't covering himself in glory. Here you had a democratically elected president literally claiming industrial-scale corruption and a rigged election. I mean, that's pretty bad stuff. That in itself would normally preclude someone from office ever again. But it's Trump we're talking about here. So I agree that getting rid of people just because you don't like the cut of their jib is not necessarily the best way forward. But I think we can settle on one thing, that Twitter and other media organisations are indeed a dark den of iniquity, a playground of hyperbole at best, and an utter sewer of lies, invention and conspiracy at worst. But Musk claims this is now the place where people get their news. Now, he would say that, wouldn't he? He owns the thing. Have you seen, let's take the obvious, grooming gang, something that has been in the news 24/7 for the last week or so. Just have a look at the information, misinformation, differing figures and stats, people who are accused. I mean, it is just, unless you're the only time you will really get truth on Twitter is when you click on one of the links from the mainstream media. That's usually what happens. Now, once in a while, there'll be other journalists that might chip in. But most of the time, it's just not. I don't know who sees that place as a go-to for their news. But all I do know is that every day somebody says, why are you not talking about this, Collins? The number of victims in the grooming gang scandal is about half. I keep seeing this figure of 500,000, 750,000, over 1 million, somebody claimed the other day. Now, nobody's going to underplay the severity of what happened with grooming gangs and the various towns and cities in our country where these horrendous crimes of rape, torture and brutality took place. Nobody's going to underplay that. But simultaneously, I also don't want to invent things about that story. But you go to Twitter and that's where you'll find it. I literally got that tweet yesterday. Why are you not mentioning this figure? 750,000 victims. You're not talking about it. And their evidence for this was to simply repost somebody else who'd said it. And that was it. Is that the go-to place for news? So I'm bound to ask, in the wake of all of this, and this is the game changer, because Musk being involved isn't just he's hardly a silent partner. It doesn't sit in the background. Zuckerberg was, I wouldn't say anonymous, but he wasn't really involved editorially or front-facing in the way that Elon Musk is. And that's great. It's his thing. He can do what he wants with it. But it does change the terms of engagement with the platform somewhat, particularly when the bloke that owns it is proclaiming that he is the man who holds the key to the truth when it comes to news. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. 0344 499 1000. Let me ask, who do you trust with your news? Who do you trust when it comes to news? I think the short answer is multiple areas is a good thing. If you're going to use Twitter as your default news place, then you've got to spend, a good hour on there just to dissect the truth of one story. Because you'll see a million versions of events, and then, of course, you find the one that chimes with your existing opinion, and you run with that, and then you realise, oh, look, 110,000 people also agree with me because they've all liked the post. And you end up in this crazy place, it's beyond an echo chamber, really. It's essentially a parlour of insanity, and certainly isn't reflecting the truth. 0344 499 1000. So when it comes to news, who do you trust with news? I don't think it's going to be Facebook because they haven't covered themselves in glory. Let's get a word on this and a few of the other big stories of the day. Simon Danczuk is back with us, former Labour MP. There's a lot to talk to Simon about. Afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. It's good to be with you.
Absolutely. And let's start then with that story. Mark Zuckerberg, who's chosen to abandon the use of independent fact-checkers. Let's have a listen to what he said on his free speech return.
We're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. More specifically, we're going to get rid of fact-checkers and replace them with community notes similar to X, starting in the US.
There it is, similar to X. And it's also worth noting, Simon, that Donald Trump was asked about this. He made a comment in a speech yesterday. Here's what he had to say.
I think they've come a long way. Meta, Facebook. I think they've come a long way. I watched it. The man was very impressive. I watched it. Actually, I watched it on Fox. I'm not allowed to say that. Say it?
Do you think he's directly responding to the threats that you have made to him in the past? With
Probably. Yeah, probably.
Probably. What are we making of this, Simon? Is this good for free speech, or is there something else going on?
Yeah, I think we should welcome Mark Zuckerberg's statement yesterday about opening up Facebook and Instagram. I think we need more free debate. And people often say voting doesn't change anything. Well, voting in the United States has clearly changed this. It's made people in the United States be able to share and say what they want on social media much more freely than they could before. So I think that's a positive result. I do find it a little bit amusing on a couple of points that it's not that many months ago that Mark Zuckerberg was saying he wasn't dampening down on free speech, but now he's saying he's opening it up. So he can't have it both ways. The other interesting point I found in the statement that he made is that he's going to move the moderators that moderate these platforms from California to Texas, in the hope that the moderators will be less woke and less liberal, which I think is quite a smart move.
Yeah, and you couldn't pick two states to compare and contrast between California and Texas. You can just see, you know, some fella that works on oil rigs during the day going home at night to be one of the fact checkers. I ain't going to take no nonsense from them Californians. It's all about to happen. I guess the difference is, and the wider question, Simon, or the area that interests me certainly, is the difference between opinion and fact, or opinion and news. And that's where we seem to be at the moment. And of course you can look at Twitter and find some really entertaining stuff. You can look at the views and opinions of people that you'd never have got to before. But amidst all of that is a little bit of a sewer that you've got to get through. It's almost like a kind of a kind of challenge that, you know, you wouldn't even create on the worst kind of quiz show in the world to wade through before you can get to the actual truth or the real story that you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting how we all use the different platforms differently. So I'm a prolific user of Twitter, but you've got to be very selective about what you use and what you read, and use all the facilities that are available. So I freely block people. I won't have any nonsense or swearing on my feed. That's for me to choose, isn't it? What comes up on my feed. So I block people, I mute people, and that's what people should do. And you have to, you know, we have to trust people to get to the right conclusion by doing their own research. We can't spoon feed people. Incidentally, I use Instagram for sort of family. It's like a family photo album, you know. So I don't do any politics on Instagram, and then Facebook is something in between, you know. But yeah, I mean, we have to trust people on this. You know, I think community notes works relatively well on X. So Zuckerberg taking a leaf out of Elon Musk's playbook, I think, is to be welcomed. So some sort of light information in the background is welcome, but you can't go banning or refusing people unless they're doing really ridiculous stuff, in my view. Yeah, that's very true. I totally agree with that. But I wonder whether, you know, and Elon Musk makes great play at saying, you know, this right here is where this is news now. You know, forget what went before, whether it's the Washington Post, whether it's CNN, whether it's the BBC or ITV. This is where you should be getting your news. Now, of course he's going to say that. He owns the thing. I understand that. But is that not a fairly dangerous path if people now take to social media for largely unchecked material in order to form an opinion on what's going on? Yeah, it is fascinating how the media landscape has changed so radically. The news landscape's changed so radically in a relatively short length of time. I go on Twitter and then root out the mainstream media to gather my views. I'll click on Telegraph stories or The Sun or the Daily Mail or the Times, and then have a look at the story. I even check, you know, I even read stories on The Guardian. Don't hold that too much against me. But there is some good journalism in there. So people have to take a rounded view. That's my advice. But you wouldn't rely just on comment on Twitter, or on X rather, to tell you what's going on in the world, because as you pointed out, you get some ridiculous so-called facts which clearly aren't reputable.
Clearly aren't. We are going to talk in a moment about Prime Minister's Question Time because, of course, the Grooming Gang inquiry did come into that. Badenoch was calling for this idea that we should have another inquiry. Starmer very much against it. I know you've got, some comments on that, Simon. We'll come to those in just a moment. We'll take a brief pause. There's the question. Who do you trust with your news? I mean, we're out there. If you want to find out what's going on in the world, where would you look? Where would you look and who would you take notice of? Who do you trust in that respect? I can't imagine. I mean, yes, as Simon just said, you can find stuff on Twitter, but I think you've got to... It's kind of like an episode of Squid Game. I think that's what I was trying to think of earlier. You've got to get through some ridiculous challenge in order to find a nugget or a scintilla of truth. And even when you find the truth, it'll then be countered by other people who say, no, this is not true at all. This is what's true. And then you go, right, OK, is that true? So a lot of people seem to think it is. There's a lot of endorsement for that comment. Maybe the truth wasn't the truth. And we're in this kind of sort of hall of mirrors nonsense about where the hell is the truth. And the truth is in the mainstream media. The mainstream media in this country certainly is the most trusted source of media and information anywhere on planet Earth. You see that, and particularly in our newspapers, where I know there is a great sort of stereotype. Oh, they just make stuff up. They don't. You get fined gazillions if you make stuff up. Do they get it wrong? Sometimes. Do they get it wrong a lot? No. Rarely. And stuff is fact-checked. It's double and triple sourced. It doesn't even get to print unless it is. And yeah, there will be errors, and there has been over the years. Nobody would dispute that. But on balance, of the trillions and trillions of column inches that have been written for over 100 years in British newspapers, you will find that 99.9% of it is absolutely the truth. 0344 499 1000.
Prime Minister smeared people who have a legitimate demand for an inquiry as far right, and that is completely unacceptable. One of the biggest scandals of child grooming that we have ever seen, that people want to know the number of victims, the number of perpetrators, where this has happened, all the things brought together in one place. This has been an evolving picture. We know much more about it now than we have done, and it is important that we take every step that we possibly can to protect children up and down across the country.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
23 minutes after 1 o'clock, Simon Danchuk is with us looking at the big stories of the day. Let's move to this one then, Simon. Labour MPs, your former party, will be whipped to vote against an attempt to force a national inquiry into grooming gangs. Kemi Badenoch, the Tory party leader, announced that she would bring forward an amendment to the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill calling for a new inquiry. Let's have a listen to Starmer during PMQs today, speaking to Badenoch about the scandal.
Once in 8 years did she stand here and say what she's just said. Not once in 8 years. They didn't act on the recommendations. They want a national inquiry. We had a national inquiry, the J inquiry, the J report. 20 recommendations, not a single one implemented. Not a single one implemented. And she said you can do two things at once. You can't kill the bill this afternoon, wreck that bill and protect children.
So there it is. I don't know who you think, Simon, won that particular battle, but I mean, you know, fundamentally disagree with Starmer on blocking this, but he's got a point that Badenoch didn't do anything either, and neither did her party.
Yeah, I did watch the exchange, and I think Keir Starmer's just got it completely wrong on this issue. This is the biggest criminal justice scandal in Britain during our lifetimes. That's not an exaggeration. It's the biggest criminal justice scandal in our lifetime. The rape of white girls by predominantly Pakistani men across countries across towns throughout our country. And I think it does require a national inquiry. I don't think there's any doubt about that. When I was the MP for Rochdale, I called for the J inquiry, which Starmer is referring to there, and really pressed the Home Secretary to implement that inquiry. But that was very wide-ranging, very historic, looking at abuse in Westminster, looking at Cyril Smith, who I called out as a paedophile, looking at many historical cases. It hardly touched upon the rape gangs that we're talking about here. That's the truth of it. I think Rotherham gets a brief mention in the whole report. They spent 10 days looking at the whole issue. And so what it does require is this national inquiry that will really identify not just the perpetrators, which is exceptionally important, but also those who covered it up. So the public servants, the politicians, the senior police officers who helped cover this up for so many years, who ignored the victims, have to be identified through an inquiry and then, if required, prosecuted. And that's what the British people want. And Starmer is denying that.
Yeah, and you found yourself up against people saying you might want to keep quiet about this, Simon.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I was the MP from 2010 to 2017. The Rochdale rape gang scandal broke in 2012 when these people went to trial, and I knew very little about the subject. But what I did say at the time is that ethnicity and religion were key factors in the abuse of these white girls, because, you know, the culture amongst these Pakistani men was that the white girls didn't matter. And so I called that out. But at the same time, I had senior Labour politicians telling me, I ignored them, but they were telling me to not mention ethnicity, to not mention the religion of the perpetrators, because they believed it would cost votes, it would cost Labour votes. And I think that is despicable.
It's an outrage. And, of course, you weren't the only person that suffered this kind of impenetrable response that came back. You know, there were council leaders saying the same thing, local politicians, law enforcement. No one wanted to get involved with this for all of those reasons. And you think, what sort of world have we lived in? And, of course, a lot of this comes post other inquiries into child abuse. I'm thinking about the Catholic Church. You know, we had films like Spotlight that were, you know, attempting to shine the torch in that direction. So it's not as if we hadn't already experienced the tricky nature of institutions or people or organisations or groups covering things up. It's not like it was 1950. You know, this is like 15, 20 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. And the suggestion is, because we haven't learnt the lessons, and I think this is true, that this type of abuse is still ongoing. People will say that. You mentioned other whistleblowers. I made a big deal of it between 2012 and 2016, campaigned very heavily on child abuse and getting answers to it. But Anne Cryer before me, the Labour MP for Keighley, was told not to talk about the ethnicity of the perpetrators. Sarah Champion, the Rotherham Labour MP, who's still in Parliament, lost a job under Jeremy Corbyn because she was insistent upon challenging these issues. And you do wonder why Starmer doesn't want a national inquiry. It's almost as though he's worried about what would come out from that inquiry.
And it's extraordinary that a prime minister, and particularly a lawyer of a prime minister, wouldn't want more information. Isn't that the quest that any leader, and certainly lawyer, should be signed up to? If there's more information, more things we can find out, let's go there, let's find out.
Yeah, absolutely. And when he was in opposition, when he was leader of the opposition before they took government in July, he called for about 8 or 9 different inquiries on a whole range of different subjects. Since he's come into power, he's set up a whole range of different quangos and reviews of anything and everything. But on this subject, he seems to be wanting silence. And to see him whip his Labour MPs today, I think, is disgraceful. So they can't vote with their conscience. The Labour MP for Rochdale, Labour MP for Hayward and Middleton, where the victims come from, or the Rotherham MPs or elsewhere, Telford Labour MP, can't vote with the conscience. They have to vote with the Labour whip. And I think that's disgraceful.
Or lose the whip altogether if they do, of course.
Absolutely.
And a final one here, A&E in crisis. Flu cases continue to soar across the UK. Although we see this story I've seen this story on front pages for about 30 years now, I think, Simon. It never goes away. I think it was worse. I think this year's worse than last year, but not as bad as the year before. There is one agitator, though, in the story. Should Britain be worried about the HMPV virus, which is spreading in all... Who'd have thought a virus coming out of China, Simon? I can hardly believe it. But apparently that's what's happened here. We've got people in critical conditions across the world. Is it something that should concern us?
Well, you're right. There's a number of issues that are colliding here, which could create a problem for government as well as us mere mortals who are, members of the wider society, which is, as you say, you've got this flu virus going around. Then you've got this virus from China, which by all accounts is already in Britain. And then thirdly, we've got the winter fuel allowance, which has been cut quite savagely by the government. And so if the number of deaths, particularly of elderly people, increases over January, February, March because of the weather and because of these viruses, then the blame will end up landing quite squarely on Keir Starmer's doorstep.
There it is. Simon, we hit the clock, but thank you, as ever. Simon Danczuk, former Labour MP. He did speak out on the grooming gang issue back then, was told you might just want to keep your gob shut, Simon. Many others suffered the same fate. Over to you on that one, 0344 499 1000. I'm also asking the question, who do you trust with your news? Now we have Facebook, who are singing to almost Donald Trump. I mean, that in itself is quite interesting, isn't it? We're changing our policy because we want to be more in favour with the government of the day. I mean, the last country that I saw do that was China or North Korea. You don't... I mean, does that in any way dilute the independence of... I mean, we can say what we like about free speech. Yeah, it's great when Musk came along and he unleashed or unshackled some of those people that were kicked off Twitter. I absolutely supported that. But by the same token, if you're making moves solely to curry favour with the government of the day, that ain't a media organisation, that's something else altogether. So who do you trust with news? Where do you get yours? And where do you read or look at or listen to and think, yeah, that's bang on? I'm not talking opinion here. Opinion's a different thing altogether. You can get that all day long. You get that here. Me talking about what I think of Musk is not news. That's my opinion. What happens at the top of the hour here on Talk is the news. That isn't opinion. There's the difference. 0344 499 1000. We'll continue this discussion with the Deputy Political Editor at The Mail on Sunday in just a couple of moments. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This comes in from Pat, says there's only one person I trust for correct news, and that is Mike Graham, which is a fair point. But of course, Mike will be the first to say, Mike delivers opinion, as I do here, as Julia or any of our colleagues. Obviously, it's intertwined with the news, and opinion is one thing, news is another. Ian says, I don't believe that newspapers are as pure as you say. Newspapers either only report or add spin to stories that favour the party they support. How is that accurate, factual reporting? And there is something in that newspapers are able to legally. You can't do it in broadcast journalism, but you can in newspapers. They can endorse a political party, they can favour a certain line, they can employ columnists that sing from a similar hymn sheet, etc. That has long been the case, but you will still, when you dissect it apart, you will still find the news in newspapers. Of course, there will be opinion pieces as well, and the online world of newspapers is slightly different again. This discussion comes around as Facebook and Instagram are to scrap fact-checkers. And certainly as a journalist, when you first read that, you go, scrap fact-checkers. And I said this before, lots of people never want to believe this for some reason. But if let's take print journalism, for example, you don't just sit there at a desk and go, I think I'll write a story on X, Y, Z. You know, you've got to source the story. You've got to be able to stand it up, as the phrase goes. And if you can't, then it won't get published. You often have it what's called legaled, where your legal department will have a look at it and go, OK, is this sound? Does it pay? All of those boxes are ticked. And so when I saw Facebook are scrapping sort of their version of that, if you like, I thought, man, that's a bit weird. And then I thought, well, Facebook is a bit weird anyway, and maybe some of their fact-checking has ultimately amounted to sort of editorialising things to some degree. Mark Zuckerberg said the move is inspired by US election results and will restore free speech and expression. Let's have a listen to what he said yesterday.
We're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. More specifically, we're going to get rid of fact-checkers and replace them with community notes, similar to X, starting in the US.
Well, even Donald Trump has responded to this one. Let's have a listen.
I think they've come a long way. Meta, Facebook. I think they've come a long way. I watched it. The man was very impressive. I watched it. Actually, I watched it on Fox. I'm not allowed to say that. Say it?
Do you think he's directly responding to the threats that you have made to him in the past?
Probably. Yeah, probably.
Probably, he says. Let's speak with Anna Mikalova, Deputy Political Editor at The Mail on Sunday. Good afternoon to you, Anna.
Good afternoon.
So we're both part of legacy media, apparently. That's the way it now works. And I think legacy media is a term used as I think it's a pejorative. I think it's meant to suggest we're the old guard. The new kids on the block are coming in the form of Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. Well, firstly, before we dissect that fully, what do you make of Zuckerberg's comments that the fact-checkers are going in the bin?
Well, I welcome the principle of what he says, which is that he is trying to do it in defence of free speech. It is fascinating to hear him finally.
And I think we've just lost Anna's line at that specific point. There's no conspiracy there, by the way. We're talking about cover-ups in the media and what you don't get to hear. Maybe the authorities, maybe the Ofcom boys say, we don't want to hear this. Anna is back with us. It's interesting that talking about truth and what you're allowed to say on the media, we get cut off halfway through, Anna, but you're back with us. You were responding to Mark Zuckerberg's comments.
Yeah, so I think the problem with what he says is he admits finally that political content, for example, was being downgraded so that people wouldn't be stressed. I mean, how sinister is that? It goes to the heart of what people are concerned about with social media. I do have a lot of sympathy with your caller's comment about how do we know what to trust in mainstream media, but as you were saying, we have regulation, we have legal teams, we are regulated by something called IPSO, whereas social media is not. And I think while I welcome the spirit of what Zuckerberg is saying, the actual problem with a lot of what he does is they are utterly untransparent about the algorithms that are used to display certain news stories from certain organizations over others. And I think until they are willing to be transparent, and this is what a lot of campaigners have called for, and MPs who have tried to look into this have called for, unless they're willing to be transparent, then what he says doesn't mean a hell of a lot.
And there is a, you know, in defence of mainstream, or what is called mainstream media, for example, in print journalism, which I think gets perhaps disproportionately more scrutiny in this argument, you couldn't just sit there and write a story because, you know, oh, you've heard that an MP is having an affair with XYZ, I think I'll print it. Your editor would then go, well, can you stand that story up? Is there any evidence of this? Have you double-checked? Have you double-sourced it? Can you, have you called all the parties involved and all of that? That's the process of, I mean, you don't even have to think about that on a daily basis, right? I mean, it's just something you do as a journalist. But, of course, on social media, you don't have to do any of that. You can just say whatever you like.
Well, look, we know people can't say whatever they like because there have been cases of people taken to court for defamation.
Well, that's true. Yes, you can't libel somebody.
But the truth is, as you say, it is a hell of a lot more difficult. And not only are newspapers regulated, individual journalists have their own reputations to think of. So there is reputational damage in just writing, as people might fear, anything you want or anything that's unsourced. But I think the way that social media companies have promoted some content from some political views and suppressed others is extremely sinister. And until that's properly regulated, then we don't have much of a free speech going on. We do have to admit that a lot of people, particularly young people, rely on social media for their news. That is the world we live in. But it makes me feel very uncomfortable when those social media sites just do not declare how they choose to promote some stories, some news articles, and not others.
And it was always interesting, wasn't it, that when X was Twitter before Musk came along with the dollars and purchased it, there was always a suspicion that this was a bit of a sort of a left-wing cartel. And if you went a bit right, you got kicked off. Even the president himself got kicked off of Twitter, which I always thought was extraordinary and completely bonkers and bizarre because, free speech and all the rest of it is meant to, come with warts and all. And, if Al-Qaeda can have an account on Twitter, I'm sure the President of the United States should have one, etc. And lots of people on the right understandably complained about that. Now, of course, we've got a situation where people on the left are complaining, saying, hang on a second, it's gone the other way. So we're still not getting the truth because there is a disproportionality in the kind of tweets I'm seeing that seem to come from right-wing accounts more than left-wing accounts. I have to say, as a user, I didn't notice it either way, other than the fact there were some high-profile people kicked off. But generally speaking, that seems to be how confirmation bias accepted and all the rest of it, that seems to be how it's now viewed. The left are saying, we've been left out. And I would imagine Facebook users might make the same argument after this recent announcement.
Yes. I think for all of this, you have to slightly separate people's perception of Twitter and these other sites when they first started, which was a bit of a breath of fresh air, frankly, a space where people could finally voice their views, whatever they were, and have what they thought was a sensible discussion. Sadly, it all fell into it became a bit of a cesspit. You had a problem with trolls, you had a problem with false accounts, and I don't think those companies have ever recovered from that. I do think the public is smarter than some of these reports make out, because people are discerning. They do understand when they read things as well that there is opinion there and there is a bit of a bias there, whichever bias you're talking about. But I think ultimately, when you look at someone like Mark Zuckerberg, he is a businessman. Yeah. He is a billionaire who is trying to pursue his companies and his shareholders' interests, and that is what we remember. He's not some martyr of either free speech or tech anymore. He is a businessman.
Yeah, spot on. Listen, Anna, thank you. Always good to talk. Anna Mikhailova, who is the Deputy Political Editor at The Mail on Sunday, with us on the programme. Over to you on this one. Conrad says, I don't trust any media with the news. They will always be biased. I get the news from everywhere and make my own conclusions. I think that's probably that's not a bad way to do it, to be honest. You should never just pick up The Guardian and go, well, there it is. Often the greatest offence I think mainstream media commit, and I don't know a way around this without making every newspaper as long as a Dostoevsky novel and making every news bulletin 3 days long, but it's guilty by omission. It's often what's not said that I think is, I don't know whether the term greatest offence is right, but you want something to be on the news. Now, I don't know how you'd appease that without the editor of every news programme phoning up everyone in the country saying, what do you want on the agenda today, Gov? I don't know how you do it. So you have to kind of, and it's always a mystery, even though I work in this industry sometimes, to work out what has got to the top of a news agenda and what has been relegated from a news agenda. Sometimes the story just disappears. And you know, what happened to that? Well, it doesn't completely disappear, but it's lost its kind of currency, as it was. So it's, no one's saying it's easy, but you should look at certainly with newspapers, because they do have angles to them, even if they do broadly report the news. They have a lot of their own commentators that will clearly give opinions in a certain political direction. So, yeah, you do have to read a bit of both. You should always read a bit of both. I don't know whether you get that in quite a convincing way on Twitter, because you don't get a bit of both. You get about 10,000 views. 0344 499 1000. Back on the phones with you next.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Ian says, Ian, come on, the BBC is guilty of quoting individual tweets from members of the general public and saying that this is in the public opinion. That gives credibility to the sewer that is the X platform. I think they, from time to time, I don't notice that so much on newspapers. Do it all the time. Newspapers create entire story. If you look at the Mail Online, for example, an entire story is created around what half a dozen people said on Twitter. You'll get the headline, "Fans go wild over XYZ." Fans angry at new twist in Coronation Street. And you think, wow, what have they done, a survey on this? They've just found 6 people on social media that said, I don't like the new character in Corrie. And they've created a story from that. In fairness to the BBC, I've never seen them use it in that respect. I'm sure once in a while, if it's relevant, they would have shoved a tweet up there. But there's nothing wrong with that. I don't have a problem with news organisations, whether they're the BBC or us, highlighting what somebody said on social media if there's a relevance to it. Highlighting it in a way that it's the general opinion or it's necessarily born out of something more than just Bob in Arbroath sounding off. That's where it gets a little bit tricky. John's in Dorset. Where do you get your news? Who do you trust with your news? John, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. I don't trust anybody, really.
Fair dues.
I'm a bit like Simon Danchuk. I will have a look at the Telegraph online.
Yep.
I will have a look at the Spectator. It's not news, but it's reasonably well informed. Mm-hmm. And basically, I don't go anywhere near the BBC now because it's almost as if, all the business with Gaza, they were almost live streaming unverifiable. I mean, I know they've got verified, but even the person who runs that is suspect. And most of the stuff that comes through, I mean, I take the Mail as a daily paper and I take the Mail on Sunday. But there's very little news. There's about 6 pages of news, and then there's a bunch about people talking about their lives, their lifestyles, and how they deal with their pressures and their alcohol and everything. That's not news.
It's almost as if, and you see, I think the BBC are just playing this mostly, and you're right on the Israel stuff, by the way, although I did see a tweet the other day that somebody was complaining about the pro-Israel bias on the BBC, which I thought was interesting. I didn't really follow it up. It was that sort of unbelievable that I didn't. But nonetheless, I think the BBC just are kind of playing it uber safe, if that's the right way to look at it. I don't know, maybe it is. Perhaps in their other strands, I don't know, Panorama and stuff like that, or a special investigation somewhere, maybe they still do okay. I don't pay a lot of attention to what they do these days, but you're right. Has there just been a general loss of appetite, John, for news, which is the reason why
I'm not sure
we've got the sort of items that you're talking about?
I think we have such an intense exposure to information that it's very difficult to sort out what's news and what isn't. I mean, the news cycle now is so short that it's very difficult. And of course, most of the stuff people react emotionally. And I was saying to your producer, if you think of adverts now, you see everything is for the emotion, the cancer patient. Don't get me wrong, I was a nurse for 49 years, but Macmillan, people with tears down their cheeks, everything is directed to the emotions. The children, Save the Children Fund and World Water, donkeys. Yeah. And it's just manipulation of people's emotions. Is it?
But it's also, there's a sort of an entertainment factor, or it's, if I look, I read a ridiculous amount of news doing this job. So I would start in the morning and I would look through all the newspapers. It's online. I'm looking at the newspapers. I look at the columnists and the comment and the editorials more vigorously than anything else, because I find them to be a kind of good source of information and where opinion lies, etc. But I also, if you looked at my phone and measured what I look at more than anything over the course of a day, is probably the Mail Online, because they have this kind of crack cocaine of columns that just drag you in there to have a read of, and they're, you know, often a load of old nonsense and took, but they get you in because they're likely to be a bit sensationalist, maybe they're a bit entertaining, sometimes they're just harmless, but they bring you in.
Yeah, but it's almost a kind of clickbait, isn't it?
It's exactly that.
You're drawn to a headline, and then you find, well, if you send us 50 quid, we will give you a lifestyle change. Yeah. 5 stone in a fortnight, you know, that kind. And really, it's a sort of news version of clickbait. Yeah. You look at it and you think that's not a story at all.
They do it very well, you know, when you look at it, you know.
Wouldn't deny that.
Yeah.
You know?
France tells Trump to keep his hands off Greenland. EU will defend its sovereign borders. There's just one headline on the Mail Online right now. It's brilliantly written because it's you think there's clearly a serious story here. I'm going to click on that because I need to know more. But then, you know, if I scroll down a little bit more, it won't be long before I get a Dancing on Ice or, you know, some kind of strictly X-Factory type story. And that's probably where their money is.
And the media will often go after, it's a non-story at the start. Football managers, for example, you know, and as soon as I see the border behind him, I thought, well, P45 by 5 o'clock. Yeah. And when you see that, and some of the titles, I mean, YouTube's quite interesting. There's some good stuff on there.
True.
But equally, you look at it, you know, James O'Brien destroys, and it's a perfectly ordinary interview with O'Brien being O'Brien, you know, trying to show what a clever dick he is. To some semi-literate
the word clashes with, you know, there's another one, you know, I have it written about myself. Ian clashes with Labour councillor. And I think, well, actually, we had quite a nice chat. But nonetheless, that's the world we're in. John, great call. Thank you. Ben's in Essex on Where You Go. Ben, who do you trust? Afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Ian. I agree. I don't think you can trust anybody. I mean, looking at Zuckerberg there, he's backpedaling a lot, and all of a sudden has made this change to want to promote free speech and opinion. I mean, this guy spearheaded cancel culture, you know, shut off Trump, and now he wants to be Trump's best mate. I mean, I think when you look at Zuckerberg, you know, and he's spearheading this cancel culture, he was a young buck that was owning Facebook, become very powerful, and I think he got infiltrated by this, you know, Democrat far-left agenda.
The Californian Silicon Valley skinny jean-wearing soy boys pitched up en masse and contaminated his head.
Yeah, that's right. And I think he got caught up. And I think he's looked and thought, I'm out my depth here, this isn't good, and wants to... I think he's sort of nervously backpedaling a little bit, trying to make himself look more human. I mean, if you look at him now, he looked so different back then. He almost looked alien, didn't he?
He did. I mean, I'm wondering, somebody's permed his hair or something now. I don't know what. He's had the rollers in, I think.
He's starting to do mixed martial arts. I think he's trying to be more human and connect with
maybe he is. Maybe it is that. But then if you look at how we view these people, like Elon Musk is a bit of a hero to a lot of people, mostly on the right. And my rule of thumb on these things, Ben, is, look, any of these guys, they're multi-billionaires. You wouldn't, or in any other walk of life, your first thought on these people is they're clearly very successful, they're clearly very clever. I wouldn't want to have a pint with them because I couldn't trust them out the back shopping, where nobody shins that high up the corporate ladder without standing on a few minions along the way. I don't believe this guy is doing everything for the benefit of mankind. That would be your normal view. But when the person says things that you agree with, we change our view. So Musk is a good billionaire, Bill Gates is a bad billionaire. You know, it's that kind of thing.
I think you've got to look at people from a very... The problem is these days we've got social media and there's so much information out there. I think we've got to have a wise, neutral filter and look at things for how they are and be able to determine what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, and not have this bias towards someone. I mean, I like Musk. I think he's incredibly intelligent. He's not only
certainly entertaining.
He is entertaining. He's not only a successful entrepreneur, he's a creator. You don't often get them two together.
True. But he's also a massive weirdo, right? I mean, and that's part of his attraction.
Polar. I
think he probably does lurk on a spectrum, and I don't say that as an insult. That's arguably part of his quality. Thank you, Ben. We're going to take some more calls. News at 2 coming next.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is the Afternoon Empire. Yes, indeed, the home of common sense. Welcome back. 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. We've got a lot going on here. Meta boss Mark Zuckerberg wants to restore free expression. And that's a massive kind of admission that he previously didn't have any free expression on his own platform. He's ditching independent fact-checkers on Facebook and Instagram, with users to add notes and posts that might be able to flag what is false or misleading, like they do over there on Twitter or X. More on that coming up. Also, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has told MPs he remains opposed to holding an inquiry into grooming gang scandal, arguing victims want action now, not the delay of a further inquiry. Many people, not unreasonable, say, well, can't you have both? Surely. Details to come, and the NHS is warning patients of 2-day waits in A&E after 9 UK hospitals declared critical incidents due to an exceptionally high number of flu cases. We do get this sort of every year. Is it worse this year? More on that shortly. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. One here from Cliff. Sources change as time progresses. This is reference free media. Who do you trust with your news? I grew up with the wireless and newspapers. It then switched to TV. Now it's gone to social media. I think, and always have, that you need to look at multiple sources and make your own mind up on available information. All sources put a slant on it. There is an argument for exactly that. Thank you, Cliff, for that. Exactly that. No matter how good you might be, how impartial you claim your credentials are, you can't leave everything at the door. There's always going to be something of you or a view that comes in, and it could just be, you know, a nuance in a word or the way a sentence is phrased or constructed that does it. Sometimes it's in the eye of the reader, of course. Because we know that, you know, confirmation bias, and if you think someone you like has written an article, you go, he's spot on, this person, and then you sort of reveal behind the curtain, it was actually penned by Jeremy Corbyn. What? Really? Strange times. Here's a man who knows his way around a quill. Kevin Schofield, political editor at the HuffPost.
I'm not that old.
Oh, you're not that old, Kev, no. It is interesting. You've worked in newsrooms, you know, all your political life, or your working life, etc. Yeah. And it's interesting because you must get frustrated as well. There's a lot of urban myths that, you know, I genuinely have spoken to people that think that journalists literally sit there at a keyboard and make something up. They just think that's what you do. Yep. Now, you know, and, you know, we've both worked for some pretty robust editors in our time, people who will, you know, I think the phrase is tear you a new one, but who don't hang around. Even, you know, and tabloid journalism always gets a rough ride, even though there is such a high skill set involved in constructing the tabloid newspapers. You know more than anyone. You know, if you just wrote something and said, here, Gov, I'm going to put this in the paper, then, you know, your boss would want to know if it's sourced, if it's legal, if it's all of those things, double source, triple source, etc. Have you phoned everybody in the story? Have you made sure, you know? If you didn't do any of that, you'd be out on your ear.
Absolutely, and it's drummed into you right from day one.
Correct.
The first day as a junior reporter. It's impressed upon you that you have to get your facts right, because it's not just your reputation, it's the newspaper's reputation, and reputation is very easily lost. You know, if a paper starts publishing things that are patently untrue, then people can quite rightly just turn around and say, well, I'm not going to buy that paper again because it's rubbish.
When I was sort of wet behind the ears, but still had a pair of headphones on my head, I was doing an early breakfast show on a local BBC station, and I was there on a kind of journalism sort of training thing, and there was a story that some protesters had gone Michael Howard was a local MP, he was obviously Dover, Folkestone and Hythe, I think it was, wasn't it? He was an MP for. So naturally he was one of our area's members of Parliament. And some protesters had sat on his lawn to protest against, it was some, I don't know, freedom to protest probably, something like that. They'd sat on his lawn, and And so I thought this was about, and I remember sitting there, it was like 5:30 in the morning, and I thought, I'll ring Michael Howard up. So, and he was the Home Secretary at the time, so I just rang him up. And I remember he picked up the phone and went, is that Radio 4? And I went, no, I'm sorry, go down a bit, it's Radio Kent. And he went, oh, right. I said, look, can you come on and talk about this? And he went, I'd love to. He said, maybe I can come on about 8. And I thought, that's pretty good. There's a house point in that. I've got the flipping Home Secretary coming without any notice. But in the meantime, I made this comment on air. I said, you know, look, we're going to be talking about the fact some protesters went round to the Home Secretary's house and sat on his lawn for 3 hours. I think Sandra, his wife, came out and made them tea, as it turned out, like they often do in these stories. And I said, what a fantastic way to make a protest. Go and sit on the Home Secretary's lawn. I cannot tell you the... let's use the word rollicking that I received. I came off air and Chris Burns, if you're listening, Chris, I will never forget this. She now is in charge of the whole thing in the BBC, said, we need to have a word. And she absolutely destroyed me over. She said, you've broken the basic rules of impartiality. She said, you cannot ever go there. And I thought, well, I said, well, it was just making a joke. She said, no, you're not here to make jokes. It's the Home Secretary. It's a potential terrorist situation. You know, all of this stuff. I mean, I could say that now in this format. But I was presenting a news
programme. And you never forget your first roasting, do you?
Oh, man alive, it was up there, you know. And I've worked for Kelvin, you know, and I know what they look like.
It's horrible.
Believe me, it was,
But it stays with you, and you've learnt from it.
100%.
Whereas if you're on social media, and not everyone on social media is like this, but obviously you don't even have to give your real name, and people are just putting out all sorts of nonsense. And then it's amplified by someone, say, Elon Musk, who's got 210 million followers. I mean, some of the stuff that he shares has got no basis in fact whatsoever.
Really random people as well. You know, somebody says something, he just goes, absolutely, or, you know, this is spot on. And I think,
there's no fact-checking involved.
It's not spot on at all. You know, you're completely out of context. At best, you're out of context in what you're saying.
So it's changed a lot.
Indeed. Well, there is a correlation between that and the fact you're at PMQs today, the grooming gang story, which has sort of been reignited because of Elon Musk. I mean, some would say, well, that's a good thing. Although he had a curious sort of journey to get there with, again, some interesting and often some slightly misplaced tweets and comments. But it did form the basis of PMQs today, this business of an inquiry.
Yeah, so we knew really, quite often before PMQs, you're never sure what they're going to ask or what the PM's going to be asked about, but we knew that Kemi Badenoch was going to ask about this because there's this vote this afternoon on the children's wellbeing and schools bill, which is in front of Parliament. The Tories have put down an amendment calling for a national inquiry into the grooming scandal, and she asked all the questions on that. Now, this is where it gets a little bit technical, but because parliamentary rules dictate that because it's second reading, you can't just amend the bill, you know, a little bit. It's either all or nothing. So basically, passing the amendment, the Tory amendment, would kill the bill. Which is why Labour are whipping their MPs to vote against it. But we know what will happen later. The vote will be defeated, or the amendment will be defeated, and your social media platforms will be flooded with the Conservatives basically saying your local Labour MP has voted against a national inquiry, and that's basically what it's all about.
Absolutely, and people then attacking Labour MPs saying, you know, you don't care about kids, and they go, well, no, actually, there was a wider bill here than just this.
But you try to explain that on the doorstep about second reading and reasoned amendments and parliamentary procedure.
You can't.
Forget it.
Well, there was one interesting bit, though. Let's have a listen to what Keir Starmer said during this. Kemi Badenoch sort of look, if you were the Tory administration half an hour ago, you're always going to be on a sticky wicket almost with any subject at the moment if you're going to attack the new government of the day. But she raised that issue of a national inquiry. This is what the Prime Minister said in response.
Once in 8 years did she stand here and say what she's just said. Not once in 8 years. They didn't act on the recommendations. They want a national inquiry. We had a national inquiry, the J inquiry, the J report. 20 recommendations, not a single one implemented. Not a single one implemented. And she said you can do two things at once. You can't kill the bill this afternoon, wreck that bill, and protect children.
So that was his response. I mean, it was a reasonable point that, you know, not once in 8 years, not just her, I mean, all the others, you know, Robert Jenrick was talking about it yesterday, he didn't raise it, and, you know, various other ministers that were close to this area, whether they were in the Home Office or Equalities, Women, Children ministers, nobody raised it in the last government.
No, absolutely, and that's a real weakness for the Conservatives on this, because you're right, it's only 6 months since he left office. They were in for 14 years.
Yep.
This scandal first really emerged in 2010, just as they were coming into power, so it's not as if they can say they weren't aware of it. So throughout the entirety of their time in office, they, quite reasonably, I think, can be accused of not doing enough to stop it. And they seem to have woken up to it rather late, now that they're out of office, and just coincidentally, after Elon Musk, as you say, has made it into such a massive global issue, really. So yeah, I can understand why, and I think it's a pretty reasonable argument that Keir Starmer can make that she's jumping on a bandwagon.
He could. I mean, I think he's missed a trick. I thought his bandwagon comments were a bit misplaced, because he stood then accused of, well, this is how this problem started in the first place, by that kind of attitude to things. Just writing everybody off as a right-wing nut job is clearly one of the reasons we ended up with young girls not being listened to.
Absolutely, no, you're right. There's a balancing act here. You can't be seem to be dismissing the concerns of people, even if they're maybe a bit late to the party. You can't just be seen to be dismissing it entirely and saying it's all part of a right-wing plot. He does have a bit of a record to fall back on, obviously, from his time as the head of the CPS. I think there's an interview in the Times today from Andrew Norfolk, who was the journalist who exposed the whole thing, and he does make the point that actually when Keir Starmer was a Director of Public Prosecutions, he did change the rules to make prosecutions easier of those involved with the grooming gang. So, he does have that to fall back on. However, I think he will now be judged on what he does now in power to try and stop it from happening again.
It's interesting, though, that when Andrew Norfolk wrote this in the Times, it was 2011 or something, wasn't it? And it was, quite game-changing stuff, but it didn't sort of go anywhere else after that, which was interesting, because often when a story, as you know, Kevin, appears in one newspaper, if it's got all the right ingredients, within hours now, the online world, but certainly the next day it'll appear in all newspapers.
Yeah.
But this one, I mean, it did get some traction, but not a lot.
It did get coverage, you're right, but it didn't seem to resonate in the way that it has now. And when you look at, if you can bring yourself to read some of the details of the court cases involving these poor girls, what happened to them, it is absolutely disgusting and shocking. And the fact that it didn't get the coverage that it deserved probably at that time is bad, really. You have to admit that, and it should have got more coverage, and something should have been done about it before. Now, it's not saying nothing's been done. There have been local inquiries. There was the J inquiry. It has had coverage, and there has been action, but probably not enough action.
And it was, I saw one journalist talking about how splintered the information was. It wasn't, again, I'm the last person to want to defend Keir Starmer, but I'm seeing people back to social media talking about everything we know now about all the towns and cities where this went on in, all of the stories about councillors or social services being told to shut up, MPs even told, don't go there, Anne Cryer and others, don't even mention this, etc. All that information on one day apparently was all put on Keir Starmer's desk, as we now know it. But of course it wasn't like that, because that's not how it works. That's not how a story works. So it's not a defence of him today, but back then, clearly, Starmer said himself, girls were let down. But I guess, in addition to cover up, if that's the right word, there was also this sort of lack of the entirety of the story that we see it now didn't quite exist in the same form then. Yeah,
and Kevin Baden always talks about joining the dots, and I think that's right.
Absolutely.
This was happening in dozens of towns all around the country, and yet, for whatever reason, people weren't willing to treat it in its entirety. So you had these focused inquiries in towns by local authorities, which is fine, but there wasn't a sort of overarching attempt to ask, well, why is this happening? Why is it happening in so many places, and what can we do to stop it and bring those responsible to justice?
Yeah, the lack of joining the dots is really where the big part of the story is.
Yeah,
is on
exactly.
This one.
And I think that's where the strength of arguing for a proper inquiry specifically into grooming gangs, because the J inquiry was about child sexual abuse in its entirety. The grooming gangs was part of it, but it wasn't an inquiry solely into grooming gangs. So I think that clearly that's what the Conservatives want to see.
And let's bring it back to social media. The fact-checker story, we began with that, but we didn't really get into the nuts and bolts of what Zuckerberg and co are doing. It's interesting with this particular story, Kevin, the perpetrators, how many perpetrators were involved in the grooming gangs? I went on social media to try and see what they were saying about it. The numbers go between 220 and 752,000. So there is the speculative nature.
It's probably somewhere in between.
Yes, it's definitely somewhere in between. Absolutely.
It's in that sort of ballpark. It's a hell of a big ballpark.
Indeed. So getting rid of fact checkers, this is Zuckerberg trying to go, oh my God, Trump's coming back. I'm not the most popular person at Trump Towers. I've got to change my thing here. I'm going to be a bit more like Elon.
Well, quite exactly what I was going to say. He's trying to ape Elon Musk.
Yep.
Which, when you consider that Zuckerberg threw Trump off Facebook previously because he didn't think he'd be coming back. Obviously, in the week, I think that was after the January the 6th, the coup attempt.
Yeah.
Trump was persona non grata, and Meta or Facebook was a very different beast in those days. They could see which way the wind was blowing.
Yep.
Nick Clegg was his right-hand man. It was seen as a liberal social media platform. Now it's completely changed. Trump's back, and they have to cozy up to the incoming administration. It's quite embarrassing, really. A real embarrassing U-turn by Mark Zuckerberg. He's contributed $1 million to the inauguration fund for Donald Trump. Nick Clegg has been replaced by a Trump-friendly person. Zuckerberg said, and you're right, now he's getting rid of fact checkers because apparently they're biased. Now, I didn't know that facts could be biased. I thought a fact
is a fact. Yeah, you think so, wouldn't you?
And I heard someone, an expert on these matters on the radio this morning, was talking about how it's not as if these fact checkers were all liberals or lefties. There was conservative fact checkers at Meta as well, to try and make sure it's balanced. But they've all gone, and now they're aping X or Twitter with this new community notes system where it's up to the users themselves to correct mistakes.
But that in itself creates this minefield of nonsense. I saw one the other day where somebody corrected somebody on something, and then, this has been community noted, and then that starts another thread of conversation. They don't believe the community notes. This is simply not true. And you think, well, hang on, this is not the bastion of it's not the oracle of truth.
No, absolutely not. No,
it's the oracle of confusion.
Yeah, the community notes are themselves pretty biased. You see the Tories getting community noted. Certainly Rishi Sunak used to get community noted all the time.
Absolutely.
By people who didn't like Rishi Sunak.
Yeah.
So it makes it appear more a bit like the Wild West rather than anything that's any structure.
One of the downsides of politicians, of course, of social media is that old tweets can re-emerge that they'd probably even forgotten they wrote.
No doubt.
This has just happened as well, a tweet from Jess Phillips. Have you seen this?
No.
So this is what Jess Phillips, who of course is now under the spotlight because of what Elon Musk, not very kindly, said about her, that she was a rape apologist and a genocidal rape apologist, I think. And she's said, that puts my safety at risk, etc. But on the 28th of September 2015, Jess Phillips wrote this. Today I saw George Galloway on the beach. I told him he was a rape apologist. Another thing ticked off the bucket list. There it is.
There you go. Yeah.
She's going to struggle with that one, isn't she?
I mean, perhaps, although George Galloway, he's not a hugely sympathetic figure, so I don't think there'll be a lot of people feeling sorry for him. But yeah, you're right. I
suppose one person saying it to another, as distinct from one person saying it to 22 million people, is the difference, is it? I don't know.
And I'm trying to remember what the context. Putting that on social media, calling someone a rape apologist, you have to be really sure of yourself.
I would imagine. I'm taking a leap here. I would imagine it's in this same ballpark of discussion.
Yeah, I think it's to do. I seem to remember George Galloway giving an interview. It was about, I can't remember, it was some celebrity who was complaining that they had been sexually assaulted or raped or something, and he was criticising them.
Right.
Because, I can't remember the detail, but he was criticising the victim, and I think that would be the context of that. If it's the same thing that I'm thinking of. Whereas what Elon Musk was accusing her of was clearly bonkers.
It was a bit over the top. But, I guess... Jess called... we've got some more information here. Jess Phillips called George Galloway a rape apologist in response to his comments about sexual assault. This was after Galloway made remarks regarding the rape accusations against Julian Assange. So you're right.
Yeah.
The WikiLeaks founder Galloway controversially suggested that Assange's actions were not technically rape and that the case had been overstated.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I can't believe it.
So it's a different context, but it's the term rape apologist that's going to haunt her.
It's the language, I guess, she's probably going to have to explain herself over that.
There it is. We'll let you get back to it, Kev. Good to see you. Kevin Schofield, political editor at HuffPost UK, with us here on Talk.
The Prime Minister smeared people who have a legitimate demand for an inquiry as far right, and that is completely unacceptable. One of the biggest scandals of child grooming that we have ever seen, that people want to know the number of victims, the number of perpetrators, where this has happened, all the things brought together in one place. This has been an evolving picture. We know much more about it now than we have done, and it is important that we take every step that we possibly can to protect children up and down across the country.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
We also started off with a question, because it kind of ties into all of this. So I think anyone who's been following the show for the last hour and a half, I think there's been enough examples from calls and messages and guests to show that the one thing we can all agree on, regardless of who you trust with your news, is that there's a pretty thick fog out there, a bit of a pea super. Never quite understood what that meant, but it's a pea super of a fog when it comes to getting accurate information. And it's fascinating, isn't it, that as we've travelled through the years, you'd think by the time we got to the 21st century, we'd be in a place where it would be the very opposite to that. It would be very easy to authenticate and confirm and double check and satisfy ourselves that you've got the right info. Who do you trust with your news? Mark's in Lincolnshire on this very point. How you doing, Mark? Can you hear us, Mark? Mark was there, but he's gone. We'll get him back. This from Steve in Lancashire. When the media become politically biased and owned by fewer politically charged people, and when the news became about opinion with experts everywhere, the mainstream media was no longer about news or trusted. What mainstream needs to get back to is professional journalism delivered as facts, not opinions. We hear news anchors delivering news with their opinions slant on it. That's ridiculous, and the public now see through it. If we can get back to real news, then social media will just be about opinion. Everyone has one, with the media as the real journalistic news. On the last point, Musk is simply saying people get their news from social media, not that it's correct. It's just a factual observation. I'm trying to think. I agree largely, Steve, with most of what you said there. I'm trying to think of news anchors giving their opinion on where we... I mean, they might do on the sort of the fluffy and finally story at the end, or a wry smile. My brother-in-law said to me recently that he thought that, I won't mention who, but one of the ITV newsreaders, he said to me, you can always tell what he really thinks. And I thought, is that true? Is that really true? Because people would say that of, I don't know, Andrew Neil, when Andrew Neil was doing, daily politics and... what was he called? This Week? I think it appeared on it a couple of times. If you went back and reviewed 50 Andrew Neil interviews and you knew nothing about Andrew Neil at all, you would be really hard pushed to conclude what his politics was. You just simply wouldn't be able to extrapolate it from those interviews. He was so down the middle, he was so... ingrained on always, you take the other side of the argument as the interviewer and you pound that and pound it and don't let it go. And he happened to be particularly, some would say vicious at doing that, others would say efficient at doing that, or effective. You wouldn't know. But if you know a little bit about his past, former editor, Sunday Times, probably a Tory, but then you conclude that. So I don't know where my brother-in-law got that from. But maybe he's right. Mark's in Lincolnshire. We've got you back, Mark. Afternoon to you.
Hi there, Ian. Sorry about that.
That's all right. Not a problem. Fire away. What have you got for us?
I managed to hit the mute button on my phone. Right. All it is, what I was going to say, the Zuckerberg thing, I think he's made a good business move, really,
yes.
As much as anything else. because the way I see it and the way I think a lot of people see fact checkers is it's curated. There's no right of reply. What they decide is the fact. And, you know, quite often that's very much politically motivated, which is the real problem. So what tends to then happen is people turn, you know, no longer go there for any kind of news, any kind of source.
Sure.
Because they just think, well, why am I going to bother? I'm only going to get their version of it.
Yeah.
I've got no right to dispute what they say. And this is why, you know, things like community notes are so much better, because anybody can put them on there, including the source, you know, so the BBC, yourselves, whoever it is, can add a community note to something that somebody posts on a, you know, reply to something they've posted. That's something that you can do. You know, it is still possible to have posts removed if they're just completely wacky and out there. So that all remains anyway. But it gives that link between the user and the source much more validity, and that's something that users will appreciate a hell of a lot more and will in turn trust. Now, whether that's good or bad remains to be seen, really. I think, you know, sometimes social media, I think like a lot of people have been saying, really, you've got to take it with a pinch of salt in a lot of cases.
Yes, I mean, what you've just said is absolutely spot on, Mark, as long as you're not taking it as the real news, because, I mean, you can find the real news on social media. Every news organisation on the planet has an account on there, of course, so you can find it there. But then what you find that gets more traction, more shares, more likes or retweets is something that somebody is often just completely made up or misinterpreted. And that, to some people, that becomes the truth, because they hate, I don't know, the BBC's a good example. They hate the BBC. This fella's come on and said, no, the BBC completely made that up because blah, blah, blah. And they believe him and not the BBC.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see, the classic example of that really is Southport, isn't it? You know, when the names gets dropped around the place and loads of people just take this as gospel.
Yeah, that's a great example. I know we can't talk about the case, but that's got a lot of... I mean, that's just one example on that particular story, as you know. I mean, let's not go there, but you're absolutely right, Mark. I mean, that was... A name went like wildfire around the world at that point, and circumstances which were simply not true. And then we end up the next day with a load of people tearing the place up and beating up police.
Which is why, like I say, you know, the user as well has to have some level of common sense to go along with this. No, you can't guarantee that. The problem is, you know, I don't want to see restrictions get put in place where something like that doesn't happen, because then it kind of feels like you are stifling things, because there are a lot of times where the information does come out and the only source that's coming, you know, that's bringing that information isn't necessarily the reputable news source. And sometimes that's primarily down to the fact that the reputable news source doesn't necessarily want to cover it, again, for the political angles, because that is very much a case. And this is where I think there's a disconnect between, as you mentioned earlier, the legacy media and, you know, this new age thing with, you know, places like Facebook and X and what have you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the disconnect is. I think it's become quite ingrained with a lot of people now that they're so used to being politically manipulated by a source of news that it becomes very difficult to trust a source of news. I think what you realistically have to do, you have to take those stories, which is, you know, again, without going into anything about the Southport, but that particular incident, somebody like myself, I wasn't going to go and repeat that because I couldn't verify it, because as soon as I did see the name, obviously, because as you said, that was out there, and it was literally everywhere. But as soon as you start digging around and looking about, and I think I actually asked a couple of times on various posts, you know, is this confirmed? What's the crack? You don't know this is the case. Nobody said it's the case. Do you know what I mean? I think the user has to take a lot of responsibility as well.
That's very true. I think also what some people mistake for, again, let's bring in the good old BBC again. So they'll read something on the BBC, then they'll read something online that's an addition to what the BBC reported. So it's not fake, it's just extra information. And then somebody else comes along and says, the BBC are covering it up because they didn't mention this. Now, they might not have been covering it up, they just didn't have time to mention every single angle of a story, of which there might be 500. So you've got all of this as well. Listen, Mark, I've got to move. It's been a great call. Thank you. 0344 499 1000. Han says, Ian Collins talking absolute rubbish with his lefty guest. We definitely haven't had a lefty guest on, so I don't know who you were listening to. Probably you mistuned your radio to Smooth FM, maybe, because I know they do a lot of politics this time of day, in between Phyllis Nelson and others. So I don't know who it was, Han, that you heard, or what it was that was said, but I did notice that Han on her profile says she's a freedom of speech and common sense advocate. But is that only speech you agree with? Maybe it was disagreement rather than rubbish that you meant. No offence taken. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk. There's a lot to get through. I've never seen so many. We've almost created the very problem that we're discussing when it comes to fake news. And news that might be either exaggerated, stuff that's actually an opinion rather than news. I mean, the whole list goes on, man alive. I want to move to this story, though, as well. NHS warning patients of 2-day waits in A&E after 9 UK hospitals declared critical incidents. This is due to the exceptionally high number of flu cases, with the latest data suggesting they've skyrocketed to around about 5,000 a day. It's happened before. We kind of cope with it in a curious way. It comes as a surge in cases of HMPV in China has prompted some alarm and led to fears of a possible new pandemic. Let's speak with Dr. Dean Eggett, GP and CEO of Doncaster Local Medical Committee, who regularly helps us out with these kind of stories. Afternoon to you, Dean. You're not wearing a mask, so I'm assuming you're flu-free yourself. Because even medics get flu, didn't you know?
We do indeed. Hi, Ian. Thank you. Over the holiday season, Christmas period, actually, I have had flu. I've had a pretty bad chest infection, but thankfully, no mask on me today.
Good work. What are we making of... I mean, I mentioned this story earlier. Every year there's the big headlines. The flu is coming. Hospitals are overrun. I understand this is worse than last year, but not as bad as the year before. So, I mean, it's not as if we haven't seen this before.
No, I don't suppose this is new. I think there's a number of issues that we've had this year, which has created a bit of a man-made, human-made catastrophe. So in terms of flu vaccines this year, we were asked to give the vaccines later in the year, so we're a bit behind the curve on that. Also, the age range had changed a little bit over the past few years, where we're vaccinating people who are older rather than some younger people. So the number of people that we've vaccinated in the time of the year has added to that, which I suspect has caused part of the problem with the flu. But it is also just a particularly bad year. On top of that, we've got a few other viruses lingering around. We have this particular one that's making an outbreak in China at the moment. We have norovirus, which causes sickness, diarrhea, and the typical respiratory syncytial virus. And who can forget, of course, that COVID is still around? So with a huge number of people who are ill and no more hospital beds.
Had you had a flu jab, by the way?
Actually, this is the first year I didn't have a flu jab. The reason being, for the past couple of years, it made me quite unwell. So I thought I'd take a chance this year of feeling a bit better. And you know what? I ended up getting the flu, so I wish I'd had it.
There it is. See, I've never had a flu jab, and there's no kind of anti-vaccine thing in that. I've just never got round to having one. I think once upon a few years ago, I was meant to have one, then couldn't make it or whatever. And my doctor said to me literally the other day, he said, you know, there's 4 or 5 viruses going around. You might want to reconsider that. But I've always thought, you know, I'm a fit and healthy young buck. Do I really need one?
Well, it's not too late for those people who do still want a flu jab. They're still available at GP practices and pharmacies. And so for those people who can get it on the NHS, I would advise getting it. Like I said, I wish that I'd had mine. It probably would have prevented me being as ill as I was. And if you are a young, fit and well buck who isn't necessarily going to get it in the NHS, you can buy it privately. Will it afford you any protection? Actually, probably it will, because flu is a pretty terrible illness. Even when you're quite healthy, it can hospitalise you, and indeed it can kill you. So if you've got the opportunity of taking the vaccine and it's not going to cause you any problems, why wouldn't you?
There it is. Dean, thank you very much as ever. Dr. Dean Eggett, GP, and the CEO of the Doncaster Local Medical Committee as well. I do feel quite good when I don't have to take something. Like, you know, I've really got to have a thumping headache before I crack open the Nurofen. I tend to just think, you know, life's better if you don't have to medicate yourself, right? But that's not a, you know, there's no kind of sense that there is sort of underlying potions within. You know, I know people can have bad reactions to certain drugs. Whether you're, you know, you can die from a headache tablet if your, you know, system is constructed in a way that just doesn't bode well with it. There's all sorts of things that can, you know, go the very opposite to what they were meant to do. So it's not really that. I've just avoided the flu thing. And it's been in my house this Christmas. My other half had the whole chest infection quite badly, still has it as well. Next door to us, here as well at Talk, Julia Hartley-Brewer was like a walking bubonic plague machine. And everybody caught it. Jeremy Kyle had it. I think he gave it to Isabel Oakeshott and Richard Tice. So, you know, this stuff does spread. I somehow haven't got it, and neither's Mike Graham or Kevin O'Sullivan. And the answer to all of that is that if you're an alpha male, you don't get ill. There it is. It's one for the feminists. Let's take some more calls. This will be Emma down in London. What are your thoughts, Emma? Good afternoon to you.
Hello. My thoughts are basically I don't listen all the radio stations that the only radio station I believe in is yourself.
That's good to hear.
Radio, because you give you proper facts and and if you look and everything, you discuss it with other people, and you get other people's opinion. All the other radio stations, TV stations, just give biased information. Mm-hmm. For example, what's happening in Ukraine. I went away for Christmas. I met a lady there who lives in Ukraine and everything. Yeah. And she's saying, "Oh, it's much worse than think." She's thanking our government helping her out. It's like much worse than advertised on TV. Wow. It's like really, really bad, you're saying. So thank you for your help and everything. So you can imagine what the people down there are actually feeling like. Yeah. They're like God, what's horrible.
What's interesting, though, Emma, about that is I regularly see people on social media making the very opposite point. That actually there's you've probably seen it yourself. You know, we're being lied to, and then they show a picture of a group of people sitting in a very peaceful coffee shop somewhere in Kyiv, and it all look no buildings are completely up around, nothing's been bombed, and then the headline or the comment the person's written is there's nothing going on. This is just a huge lie, which also is not true, by the way, because it's usually a photograph from years ago, or it might be one of the places that isn't bombed. It's probably not Kyiv. Do you know what I mean? It's like this is the world of misinformation we live in.
Yeah, that's exactly. I just basically, and when I was coming back, somebody said, "What about Israel and everything?" I think I have got no comment because I don't know. All I'm hearing is from yourselves and other media channels.
Yeah.
Even though I believe what you say, but then again, there's certain bits that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Till I find out somebody who's living there and going through it and everything, that's when I believe it. And the taxi driver, when I was coming back, said, "What do you think? Oh, they're doing this." I said, "Well, excuse me, I've got no opinion." He was shouting at me.
Yeah.
In the back of the car, in the car and everything. I mean, excuse me, where are you coming from? Where are you getting this information from?
It's fascinating, and people. That's the point as well. That's another aspect to this, is that this would all be, it would be one set of problems if it was just something we talked about. But people, families fall out over this stuff.
And they said one person, the hostages were something. I said, excuse me, have you seen the news lately? They're saying the hostages are released. And then they're saying on TV the hostages aren't released. Excuse me, 1 minute you're saying they're released, next minute you're saying they're not released. What is the truth?
Well, I think the truth of that one is that some have been released, but not all of them. And until it's all of them, this thing ain't stopping. But that's another point. Emma, thank you very much indeed for that. One here says, from Marco, do you remember when the BBC had to apologise to Nigel Farage? I think this was... In fact, I can think of two incidences where they apologised over... it was an inaccurate report about why his bank account was terminated. Do you remember that? The Coots story? They apologised over that. But I seem to remember something else when... Didn't a newsreader say something on the lines of... I've got a feeling that Marco isn't referring to that. I think he's referring to the one that was live on air when a newsreader said something like Nigel Farage with his usual... Was it usual far-right views or something like that? And then very quickly had to retract it. It was something on those lines. That's very true. Although, this stuff happens. Although I did notice that yesterday Mr Farage called somebody a wife-beater, which I don't think was true. And so everyone can have a bad day, I suppose. It certainly wasn't true, by the way. 0344 499 1000. More truth, more messages coming your way, and a brand new, yes, it's a brand new Voice of Doom coming next.
It's Plank of the Week with Mike Graham.
Good evening and welcome to Plank of the Week. I'm Mike Graham and this, of course, is Talk. I think he was shocked. You could see the genuine shock.
I was like that.
Sees the boats coming in. Right, let's have the women and children first. He went, oh, just you lads, is it? Yeah.
He's been allowed to develop into this huge sort of problem for the BBC.
Yeah.
He'd love it, wouldn't he?
He would love it. That's why we're not doing it.
That's why we're not doing it.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk. It's 10 to 3. So, before we go any further, Voice of Doom is back. Yesterday's one went. It was Chris Smith, the former culture minister in the Blair government, if you missed it. So we've got a brand new one. The Chris Smith one ran for, well, it was over 3 weeks, but we were off for summer Christmas. But it went for 7 days, basically. It was a constant rollover until somebody yesterday got it right. This one, I've got a funny feeling, might go on forever. Have a listen.
Give me hundreds of examples.
Oh, who is that? Don't call in, there is no prize. You can message in if you fancy having a crack at this. Here it is again.
Give me hundreds of examples.
Who is that? 87222 if you want to message. If we get a right answer in the next 10 or 15 minutes, we will reveal all on the other side of the news. If we don't, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here it is again.
Give me hundreds of examples.
Who is that? 87222. Details on the way. Back to your calls. This will be Mark in Kent. How you doing, Mark?
Hello. This is... I was giving you a call. I've not been listening for the past hour, so apologies if I'm repeating anything that was said.
Right.
It was regarding your mainstream media. Where do you get your news from?
Yes.
So I've always, for 30 years, I've read the papers online, read the papers, watched the news, general mainstream media news. In August, they got pointed towards X.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we look at X for most of the news.
Yep.
Now, what I've found is there will be stuff going on in the UK that is not even mentioned. Obviously, you guys, the station of common sense, still regulated by Ofsted.
Ofcom.
GB News, classed as well. Ofcom, yes. Sorry, Ofsted, the schools. GB News, same, Ofcom.
Yep.
There's only so many things you can say and do. Videos you can show, etc.
But there's pretty much most things you can show. I mean, you just can't libel anybody or breach a court order or commit contempt of court or do something...
Also, you've got to do your fact-checking, you've got to do...
Yeah, or do something that goes beyond the realms of taste and decency. We wouldn't want to be showing a bizarre OnlyFans page at this time of day. You might get away with it in context later at night, if that makes sense.
That's it, yeah. So, I mean, back fireworks night, I remember seeing the video on X that showed loads of people up in Leeds or something firing fireworks at houses, cars, residential streets. There wasn't any mention of it anywhere across any newspaper, any radio station, any TV station in the UK.
But was that a story? I mean, I don't say this to be critical of what you've just said, because you could be right, could be a massive story there. But every fireworks night, there's always a couple of half-wits that start doing the fireworks.
No,
right?
this was on a mass scale. There was hundreds and hundreds of kids in an area doing it, but there's no mention of it, right? And
that's interesting.
What it shows me is that actually there's an element of bias there, because
that wouldn't be because somebody had decided not to talk about it.
No, but then relating back to the papers that we used to read,
because we'd have talked about that every day of the week if it had come on across my desk.
Yes.
That'd have been our main subject.
But to an extent. So, and obviously I go back on the papers to what I used to read, and they're telling me about Katie Price got a new facial or something.
Well, it's a very important story, because, we need to keep up with what's happening to Katie's Fizzog.
This is the thing. So actually, just some of the stuff going on in the UK, you find out about on X. You don't find out about.
That's very true. But and that's always been true. In the same way that some stuff you find in. I mean, it never used to cease to amaze me that you'd see something in a local newspaper. Sometimes a murder makes the local news. You'd think a murder should always make the national news, but it really doesn't.
It's too common now. Too common.
Sadly, that's part of it. But it's also not that interesting anymore in terms of news, and most news outlets have a commercial consideration, and that plays a factor as well.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the thing, going back to X. So now, what Musk is saying about this being the new town square and stuff, there is an element of that because it's unregulated, it's unbiased, it's yes, it's not always correct. You have to check things out, but it's telling you information about what's really going on in the UK and not what the narrative is at whatever particular time of the week.
Listen, do us a favour, Mark. Stay where you are, because we'd love to get, and you might not still have your hands on it, I'm going to put you back to Finn. Love to get our hands on that story that you were referring to. It's too late to talk about the story, but I'd be intrigued as to why, based on what we just heard from Mark, why it didn't get wider coverage. One thing I do know that often happens on social media, somebody will print something and say, why are you not talking about this? And you go, because it happened 6 years ago. That's why we're not talking about it. That's sometimes the case. I'm pretty sure that's not what Mark is referring to there, but we'll try and find out a little bit more info on it if we can. This is Richard down in London about trust in the media. Richard, what have you got for us?
Well, this late gang scandal is actually a big case in point, because what we hear from Elon Musk is a level of anger and concern that we don't hear from anybody on the UK media, because it appears as though this problem has spread over as many as 60 towns and cities. The figures people are talking about are in the hundreds of thousands.
Well, there's one of your problems right there.
Of girls raped.
Yes,
raped
but one of the problems is that there's no evidence for that figure.
Well,
other than somebody saying it on social media, and there's no evidence for the fact there's. I think you might not have heard it earlier, Richard. When I looked yesterday, I wanted to find out how many perpetrators there were, how many offenders of these kind of horrendous crimes there were. And a swift look on Twitter told me that it was either 220 or 752,000.
Yes. Yes.
So I got a bit of a confused picture, if that was the only place I went to get my info, if you know what I mean.
Well, yes. I mean, we know this is over. Well, we certainly know it's over a 20-year period, and we know the reports are over as many as 50, 60 towns and cities.
Yeah, I'm absolutely convinced it's underplayed, which is one of the reasons I wanted to find out more about how many, potential perpetrators there were.
Yeah. And the point is, even if it is just even if it's not hundreds of thousands, it's clearly a loss, and it's clearly a loss to towns and cities. And what we're hearing from Musk is that this is off the scale. I mean, in fairness to Alison Pearson, she has actually said that this potentially is the worst social problem that we've ever had.
But is the problem, though, Richard, journalistically, you're absolutely right. I mean, in fairness, Musk isn't the only person that's got really angry about it. We've been getting angry about it for a long time, and it does come up from time to time. But if you're the richest man in the world and the President of the United States right-hand man with 220 million followers, then naturally your voice resonates a bit.
Yes, it does, Ian, but I'll give you another example. This is that back in 2020, there was at the House of Commons Select Committee there was discussion about stop and search, and Yvette Cooper at the time was trying to get, I think was obviously trying to put pressure on Cressida Dick to resign over stop and search and saying that it's disproportionate. Now, Cressida Dick said, well, you do know what the figures are, don't you? People from a certain demographic are 8 times more likely to commit homicide than anybody else. Now, that report, yes, it was in The Guardian, but it wasn't. That report was not actually. That was like what Cressida Dick said about the ratio of homicide being 8 to 1 for one demographic demographic versus everybody else. That was not...
We talked about it. We talk about it all the time. We talk about it with knife crime all the time, and we're not the only ones that do. Listen, Richard, I'm not cutting you off. The news is literally upon us. It will cut us off whether we like it or not. Here's the voice of doom quickly.
Give me hundreds of examples.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
You better believe it. It is indeed the afternoon empire. Lots to get through here at the home of common sense. MPs will soon vote on whether to launch a fresh investigation into grooming gangs, but Prime Minister Keir Starmer remains opposed, urging victims want action now, not the delay of a further inquiry. I think you could reasonably ask, could you not have the two? We'll talk more on that in just a few moments' time. Also, Meta boss Mark Zuckerberg says he wants to restore free expression by ditching independent fact-checkers on Facebook and Instagram, with users adding notes to posts that might be false or misleading. It's the community notes thing like they do over at the Twitter. Similar deal. And Donald Trump has hinted at using military force to control the Panama Canal and Greenland. I think he also wants to nab a bit of Canada as well, and proposed renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. You've got to admire the kahunas on this guy, right? We're live in the States shortly. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Before the news, it was back. The voice of doom, the political mystery voice thingy. Every day around about 2:45 we do this. It was a brand new voice today. This is the voice we played you.
Give me hundreds of examples.
Who is that? Was it Lisa Nandy? No. Angela Rayner? No. Lucy Powell? It wasn't. Rebecca Long Bailey? Remember her? No. Nigella Farage? No. Liz Truss? No. Angela Eagle? No. Joe Cox? No. Baroness Jackie Smith? No. Have a listen to the voice again.
Give me hundreds of examples.
We didn't get a right answer, which means Yes, it's in the bag. It's another rollover. It's back tomorrow, 2:45. We can all try again. Now, MPs will soon vote on whether to launch a fresh investigation into grooming gangs. The Tories have tabled an amendment to a bill to try and force a national inquiry into the issue. The leader, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch, warned that the government's resistance could lead to fears of a cover-up. But the Prime Minister says he's met with victims who said they want action instead. Well, you might think they could get a bit of both. Let's speak with Marilyn Hawes, CEO of Freedom from Abuse. We spoke to Marilyn around about a week ago when this was being discussed. The Prime Minister doesn't want another inquiry. The Leader of the Opposition does. Marilyn, where do you think this one's going to end up, bearing in mind Labour have a thumping majority and can win almost anything at the moment?
Well, he doesn't want it, does he? Because he doesn't want the truth to come out. That's the point. I think, well, he'll obviously win the vote, but I think he's going to lose the argument.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was a victim of this heinous crime, and you've got to remember these girls were not believed, some were arrested, they were called child prostitutes, they have been raped by maybe 14 men in one evening, having been drugged. This isn't, I mean, this is beyond granddad abusing the granddaughter. Do you know what I mean? This is on an industrial scale. Brutal, murderous. One little girl was doused in petrol and threatened that she would be set on fire. There was a girl in Telford that was burnt in a house fire, pregnant with the abuser's baby. It's across the UK, and yeah, way over 50 towns. And the thing is, with Alexis J, and I mean, I really admired what she did with the extra inquiry, but it did look at education, it did look at the church, it looked at the BBC, and yes, it was wide, but since 2022 other evidence has come forward. People are now speaking and naming and shaming, and I have said all over media this last week, we are finally naming it. It is predominantly Pakistani men and Bangladeshi men. Why? Well, I think we need to start looking at some of the imams who have actually been encouraging this, some of them. Do you know, I don't know if you know this, but we have 85 Sharia councils in the UK.
Yeah.
Now, the first one was in 1982. Is this a gentle takeover sort of thing of going to be... I think it's... And of course, it's not all Muslims, and we shouldn't be saying Muslims. We shouldn't be called them Asian gangs, because Asia's massive. You don't get Japanese men doing this. We shouldn't be saying grooming gangs. These are rape gangs, murderous rape, drug, alcohol gangs. Say it what it is. It's beyond grooming, and I don't believe some of the youngsters even today understand, and I know this because I go around the schools, they don't understand how it actually works, how clever and quick you can be coerced into it. So there's a lack of education there as well that is needed. But, you know, I just think it's hilarious because Elon Musk is the guy that's kicked this out of the long grass and back firmly into the House of Commons, where it needs to stay. And you guys, I have got so much respect for the media because you are not letting this drop, and neither should you. Indeed. Because if you do, it's going to go back under the covers again. I don't think, and if I was a victim of this crime, where I could be Rotherham, I could be Barrow and Furness, because there was a terrible case there, Newcastle, Southampton, Portsmouth, you name it, wherever. If the council had turned their back on me, which they all did, the Labour councils, why would I trust them now? Why would I trust Oldham, that has been corrupt for decades, to run its own investigation? I wouldn't feel confident as a victim of this crime. I have not been heard say for maybe 30, 40 years in my life, because this has gone on for over 40 years. And what's his name? Oh, Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester. He actually said, I saw it in a quote in the paper last week, he knew in the mid-90s this was going on. So what's he been doing for 40 years? Sat on his hands?
What's interesting about this, can I just ask, Marilyn, on the point of an inquiry, one of the areas... and look, the argument seems to go, there's been an inquiry, there's been lots of sort of localised inquiries, but as you alluded to at the beginning, the Baroness J inquiry, whilst thorough in many respects, wasn't specific enough on this particular area, and that's the bit that's sort of missing here. But the other thing I think an inquiry would do it might well flush out those that kept quiet. It might well flush out whether it's law enforcement, whether it's CPS, whether it's social services, whether it's councillors, whether it's MPs, anyone that had information and either kept quiet or told others to keep quiet, in the same way that Paula Venables was flushed out in the post office scandal, who everybody thought was this sort of slightly quirky older lady that was a bit bonkers, but she meant well, and we find out she knew everything. There's one. I want one of those in this case. I want loads of those. I want to find out who the councillors were that didn't investigate, who the law enforcement, CPS, were that said, no, there's nothing to see here, Governor. That's what I want to come out here, Marilyn.
Well, we also know that Keir Starmer was one of those. Because I have the date down here. I have a date here. Where was it? 2008 to 2013, he was the Director of Prosecution and he turned his back on it. He didn't do anything with it. And there is no, it doesn't matter whether you're Labour, Liberal, whatever you've been, Lib Dem, Tory, every single government has failed children in this country. About it all very well from then jumping up on the front rows now going, oh, it's dreadful that children are ever abused in this country. Well, they have done stuff all about it at any time. They just don't have the spine. They come out with lessons have been learned. What a joke. I mean, wasn't it last week Starmer said, there was a lack of understanding. Excuse me? So you get a couple of 12-year-old girls, and this is a true case, that turned up, thrown out of a taxi, turned up at the doors of a police station, bedraggled, bruised, blood coming out, their clothes were ripped, and they said they had been raped and they'd been given drugs, blah, 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 and they were just ignored by the police and stuffed back in a taxi. Now, that's unacceptable. And in Rotherham, some of the officers were involved themselves. Now, also what we know is the taxi drivers in Rotherham that were actually convicted at the time are now out free and back driving their taxis again. There's also a whole load of perpetrators out there that were never convicted who are still working their tricks around town.
Well, there's one child rapist up there that is, currently has got a job as a food delivery driver.
I know.
So you have a paedophile knocking on your door with a beef chow mein. I mean, I'm sorry, there's something very wrong about that.
Well, the wrong thing is that the lefties, the wokies, whatever you call, we should have zero tolerance on this. Yep. Zero tolerance. And this is what I fear. Starmer will just do what he thinks necessary to keep the media wolves off his back, is what I think. Okay. And because he doesn't want the inquiry, he will get away with that control. And I agree with you, Ian, 100%. Why is it a difficult inquiry? Look at the backlog. Who was the councils? Oldham. Who was this? Who was that? In all these towns, right? Yeah. Come all up and stick them in a court, arrest them, take their fat pensions away from them and bang them up and charge them. That can't be difficult. It isn't difficult. They just don't want to do it because it might show... Oh, yes.
The system is broken.
Councils.
Yeah, nobody or indeed maybe a disproportionate amount. But listen, Marilyn, I have to stop there just because we want to get other voices on this, and you've been brilliant as ever. Marilyn Horst, CEO of Freedom from Abuse, with us on the programme. Let's get a word from Harvey Proctor, former Conservative MP. Harvey, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you and to your viewers and listeners.
Nice to have you with us, and nice to speak again too. Now, you have been in the thick of accusation and all that goes with it, and it didn't just come from a little bit of tittle-tattle on social media. It came from people literally in Parliament talking about something. So you already have quite an understanding of how the system, as I just referred to it, can go horribly wrong. Whether it's in favour of somebody or against somebody, it can go horribly wrong. You wrote today a piece in the Times on this, and you feel rather strongly about the issue of having an inquiry into this grooming scandal.
I do. I believe that there should be an inquiry, a public inquiry, and I believe it should be chaired by a High Court judge or a retired High Court judge, for example, like Sir Richard Enriquez. Yes, in part, the IICSA or the J inquiry did look into some of this, but not much of this. Remember, it was set up by Theresa May when she was Home Secretary, not to discuss these matters, but really to investigate into what became Operation Midland. And she went on television, the Andrew Marr Show, and said that allegations eventually against me and other Conservatives and ministers and army representatives, Field Marshal Lord Bramwell, for example, were the tip of an iceberg. And of course, when Operation Midland collapsed, turned out it was actually not even the tip of an ice cube. When Operation Midland collapsed, they had this inquiry twiddling their thumbs about what to do. And then they decided to continue, not as what they planned to do, which was politicians and child sexual abuse, but rather education, religion, and in part this matter of what is called wrongly grooming gangs, rape gangs, by Pakistani and Bangladesh men in certain northern towns. But they didn't really get to the bottom of it. There was no intention to get to the bottom of it. Now, let's look to see why politicians are up in arms about it now. It's because they don't want to get to the bottom of this matter. If you recall, before the general election, Sir Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party at the time, couldn't stop talking about his role as a DPP, inferring that because he thought he'd made a good job at the DPP, he would make a good job as Prime Minister. Ever since, he has prevented anyone asking him questions about his role as DPP. Why is he dragooning the Labour members of Parliament to vote down the opposition's demand for an inquiry? Because that inquiry, in part, would have to look at his role as the Director of Public Prosecutions. That he wants to run a mile away from that. This is all about a cover-up. I'm not saying it's a new cover-up. Cover-up has been going on for some time. But we do need a public inquiry with all the legal rights that go with a public inquiry from a point of view of still considering prosecutions. And that is what the Labour Party are running away from.
It's interesting, Harvey, that, and I alluded to it at the beginning, when we have this sort of idea of politicians or the establishment or the system, whether it is the police, the CPS, certainly the Office of Prime Minister and Home Secretary, we see these sort of totemic positions as being infallible in many respects. Certainly they wouldn't, not in this country at least, that they wouldn't dare, they're not corrupt, they wouldn't dare make stuff up, they wouldn't believe something unless it was thoroughly investigated. These are thorough, and over the years of our democracy they've developed to be very credible positions that we respect. Now, you now know, as somebody that's been there, and something similar might be at play here now, as you've alluded to, that actually the very people that you think surely they're going to, they're not going to fall for this, or they're going to at least ask some questions and try and get to the truth. You know that people in high office, you just mentioned it there about Theresa May and her time as Home Secretary, are not quite as infallible as we like to think. In fact, there are more than a few cracks in the woodwork when it comes to the system.
Oh, yes. I was the subject of a homosexual witch hunt. I won't go into details about it now. I've talked about it a great deal in the past, and I've written a book, of course, called Credible and True. But you're right. Politicians are some of the most gullible people I've met. And the higher up the greasy pole you go, the more gullible they can get. And certainly on this issue, there is a gullibility. But in this case, it's with a political reason. And the political reason is that the Labour Party do not wish this matter to see the light of day. That is why Starmer is dragooning his large majority in the House of Commons to vote down what most victims, most people who know about this matter require, and that is a judge-led public inquiry with full powers to get to the bottom of these matters.
Well, it's not going to change at the moment, and of course that thumping majority that Starmer has will see to that anyway. But if it's any consolation to any of us calling for the same thing, totally echo your words, Harvey. The story certainly isn't going away just yet. Thank you, Harvey Proctor. Great to have you with us, former Tory MP. It is worth just looking over the details of what Harvey Proctor went through and some of the people that were accusing him of, oh my God, I mean, the list was, this is the whole Carl Beach thing and goodness knows what else. And, you know, the alleged Westminster paedophile, it's horrific what he went through. Turned out to be a crock of lies. But before anybody established that, as Harvey Proctor just said then, there were many people in high office that were coming out saying, this is outrageous, these people are going to be called to account. Some of those people don't seem to have quite the same level of enthusiasm for an inquiry on the industrial rape, molestation, violent attacks, consistently over many years on young girls. Some of the same voices that agitated to stick Harvey Proctor, an innocent man, into jail, have very little to say on this. I mean, don't you find that in itself a little bit weird? Send Harvey to the chiller, he's done nothing wrong. All the people that were perpetrators of child grooming gangs, and just as bad, those that protected the perpetrators directly or even indirectly, should also be in the dock. So we'll chase up Harvey and these scurrilous lies that came from a really unreliable witness in the first place. We'll chase him. We'll even go on the TV and talk about it. But the other lot, no, we don't need to talk about that anymore. I think we've done that. No, we haven't done it. And when the smart money says that this is still going on, then surely, if nothing else, for that reason, if no other, you need some level of inquiry. Doesn't have to be quite the same as the Baroness J inquiry. You could do something that will be more thorough because it will only focus on this case. You could insist on some kind of expediency in getting it through without losing credibility or the thoroughness required to investigate this kind of thing. You could do all of that. You could tick all of those boxes. You could get right to it rather quickly. And you could establish who those people are, the perpetrators and the enablers. And the enablers are anyone who tried to cover it up. It's not hard to understand. I did notice that Reform UK said they would have an inquiry if there wasn't one. Now, these came out of Nigel Farage's mouth in an interview yesterday. I don't know whether he's going to regret saying it. I hope he doesn't regret saying it. I don't dispute that Nigel would have meant it, but mobilising an inquiry, saying it and doing it are two different things, and that could be not only incredibly costly, but the apparatus to set it up properly so it doesn't look like a sort of political party just having a go at something would be tricky. But fair play if he can do it, because that's where we need to get to establish that it isn't going on when lots of people say it still is. And also just to clearly establish, and I don't think it would be too much to ask, to have a look at the entirety of the story, how it went on for so long, who were the people behind the scenes of this. I think they're reasonable questions that most people would like to see an answer to. But Keir Starmer apparently doesn't. And I'll just briefly say what I said at the very beginning. Surely as a politician, as a Prime Minister, as a lawyer, you would have an instinctive thirst for new information. That goes with the territory. It's in your DNA, isn't it? Oh, there's new information. Oh, there's stuff we didn't examine. There's things that are yet to be properly, legally spoken about. Isn't that right in you, intrinsically, within your neurological system, your biology, everything you cut you in half, that's what you stand for. To investigate new facts, stuff we didn't know, people not joining the dots, things that we can look back up now and see where they can... Of course you would be thinking that. but apparently not Keir Starmer. Go figure. 0344 499 1000.
The Prime Minister smeared people who have a legitimate demand for an inquiry as far right, and that is completely unacceptable. One of the biggest scandals of child grooming that we have ever seen, that people want to know the number of victims, the number of perpetrators, where this has happened, all the things brought together in one place. This has been an evolving picture. We know much more about it now than we have done, and it is important that we take every step that we possibly can to protect children up and down across the country.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Let's talk about the media. And the question I put, who do you trust with your news was the question. Ben did send this in, actually sent it in a couple of hours ago, and I've only got around to seeing it. Can we have the old Ian Collins back, please? It seems 2025 Ian is anti-Trump, anti-Musk, and seems to think we should believe the legacy media. What, like Sky News and the BBC? Fair point. They certainly do lie about some things. I don't know whether, not specifically talking about Sky and the BBC, neither of which do it for me, but I don't know whether lying is the right answer. Sometimes it's the omission of something or the lack of digging deeper into something that's the problem. Being anti-Trump and I quite like Elon Musk. I was a kind of supporter of Elon Musk before most people had heard of Elon Musk. I talk about this guy doing amazing things with cars, watch this space and all the rest of it. But being anti is the wrong word, I would say, Ben. I think we should always be suspicious of people with lots of money and lots of power, whoever they happen to be. And I don't care whether they're Democrats, Republicans, Tory or Labour. I don't ever want to look at leaders and influencers, real influencers, not Insta influencers, with anything other than suspicion, frankly. Dave is in East Yorkshire on the issue of grooming gangs. Dave, what have you got for us? Hi.
Hi, Ian. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Far away.
Obviously, this is a huge subject, and my 2-minute soundbite isn't going to do it justice. But regarding Elon Musk, as you've just brought him up,
yes,
there is no way this debate that took place in Parliament today would have happened at all without his intervention. And whatever you think about him, this being discussed and re-highlighted is, as far as most normal thinking people are concerned, is a good thing. And watching these people squirm at what they have and haven't done is what's required. Now, moving on from that, as I listen to your programme regularly, Maggie Oliver was saying the other day, she's sick of these 5-minute things here, 5 minutes there, and nothing ever gets done. And from this, what I'd like to see, it's impossible to imagine that all the perpetrators of what's happened are ever going to get caught. That's whatever the guidelines are, how it goes forward, that's too ambitious as much as
that's
much
very
as
true.
Desired. But what I think could be, in all of these towns, people know who the key players are. The key players who directed traffic, who also made money from this. And for politicians who look the other way or for whatever, a real, to get some justice for the victims is if the proceeds of crime could find out who these key perpetrators are, gather up every asset they've got, and then devote that towards the victims so that they can get some form of help in the future and retribution for what they... Of course, that's not going to make up, I'm not saying it is, but these people, money is also a driver, and being able to take from these key families, whoever the key players are in these various towns, taking that money back would be a step in the right direction. And very, very quickly, and lastly, from a media perspective, no one gets the news from the BBC anymore, and there's somebody laying in prison at the moment in solitary confinement, and without his intervention, and Nigel Farage can say that he's been talking about it. You watch the Jeremy Paxman interview with Tommy Robinson about 15 years ago. Jeremy Paxman, who just terrorised Michael Howard. He was a big I am. He just terrorised Michael Howard, and all politicians were scared of him. And this young lad who'd lived the experience went up against him. Paxman tried to ridicule him, and if you listen to what Tommy Robinson said back then, it's all coming through now.
That is very true. By the way, he's not in solitary confinement. That's just an urban myth. We don't have solitary confinement in this country. We have segregation, but that's a different thing. You don't get 3 hours with Dan Wootton and make a podcast on the telephone if you're in solitary. But that's another story. But that's another thing that makes its way around social media. You're right, Dave. You are right. Wasn't the first to mention it, by the way. And it was mentioned and talked about. The problem he had was a credibility issue, Dave. He had a credibility issue. Do you take somebody who's been associated with the EDL and God knows who else seriously when it comes to making a complaint where the perpetrators are predominantly brown? I mean, you can see how hard that one was to sell.
Yes, but again, the image that's portrayed via the BBC, Sky News, from what I've seen, and from what I see, there's very little racism could be involved when you've got people of all faiths, colours surround themselves with him. So, but
the difficulty is, and I've said that, and I don't know the answer to this, by the way, and I don't think you're thoroughly wrong. I don't think, Robinson deserves. Somebody called him a white supremacist yesterday. Yes. That was false.
Should be sued.
That was well, he may do. That was false, and I don't know why it went unchallenged. He was also called a wife beater, arrested or in prison for wife beating. That was also not true. You can't make stuff up about somebody, even if you don't like them. But I can see how, bearing in mind, for years, this one bloke was seen as a man you certainly wouldn't want to trust out the back mowing your grass. This was a fella that liked to tear things up a bit. He liked a football riot. He liked, he didn't very much like people who weren't white, was the perception, rightly or wrongly. And, then discovers something, or along with others starts talking about something. You can see why he might not be a credible witness, Dave.
I know my time's coming up, but on that, I believe, and again, from what I understand, is that is because a member of his family was a victim. So if you've got a member of your direct family as a victim of that, it's going to highlight these matters to you.
No, I don't dispute that. I don't dispute that, but I think sometimes, if, for example, I don't know, I can't really give an example without sounding either unfair or sounding a bit daft, but, you know, somebody can be wrong about lots of things, and the moment they're right about one thing doesn't sort of eradicate all the other stuff they've done in the past. It's a hard... I'm not disputing it's not. Dave, thank you very much indeed for that. I've said this story before. I was at college. I never talk about that very often, but I have told this story before. I was only there for about 3 minutes. College and me didn't work out. So I was 16. There was a fella at college, we'll call him Trev, and Trev was a nut job. Trev was somebody you didn't trust out the back doing anything, frankly. Trev was probably the fella that was nicking a tenner out of people's wallets when they weren't looking. He smoked, he drank, he had addiction issues, he had some appalling views, certainly on girls that were on the course, etc. But this man knew more about socialism and the evils of socialism you could ever imagine. And the bloke would every now and again have these amazing moments of clarity where he would declare and almost give mini lectures about what had happened in the past, and look at East Germany and what's been going on there and what happened in the past. And he could quote the figures, the prime ministers, the leaders. He knew journalists and agitators and protesters. The man was encyclopedic. He should have been giving, you know, not just TED Talks. He should be at the United Nations giving speech. He should be an advisor to government. But you could never get Trev to do that, because in every other respect, he was, well, I can't use the word, he was just an unreliable witness. So the quality that he had and the one bit of credibility this fella could have stuck on his CV was completely obliterated by his previous. And that, sadly, is sometimes the way it is. Not for everybody. Some people circumnavigate the bad stuff. Trump is a great example. He's come through it all. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 0344 499 1000. Now, lots to talk about, and, of course, more comments from you on the way. Let's look at what is happening in the United States. Extraordinary speech yesterday from Donald Trump. It went on for about 3 days. Mr. Trump refusing to rule out using military force to take control of Greenland. I've never quite got to the bottom of what the... why Greenland could be seen as the property of the US. The president-elect says it's vital for the protection of the free world, saying Russian and Chinese ships are everywhere. He also wants control of the Panama Canal for security reasons. He even proposed renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. He says it's got a lovely ring to it. It's got a lovely... Let's speak to Michael Graham, managing editor at Inside Sources and US political commentator as well. Michael, good afternoon to you. I mean, this was sort of Trump stuff with bells on, right? I mean, this was I didn't even mention Canada, by the way, in that. That's another one in the potentially in the Trump net for acquisition.
Well, greetings to you there in your beautiful country, also known as the future new America.
The 58th state of the United States.
I can't wait till London is rightfully back, rightfully under the control of America where it belongs.
There'll be more. We'll finally get more Popeyes. We only have one or two, so there you go.
But no, so what's fascinating to me is on the Greenland thing, people are freaking out about it. Democratic U.S. Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania gave an interview yesterday, and he's told everyone, stop freaking out. This is what Trump does. He throws out a bunch of ideas that are pushing in a direction, not, a destination, and don't freak out. And he pointed out, historically, and this is true, that since the 1800s, America has considered trying to buy the Greenland from Denmark. In fact, President Harry Truman, a proud Democrat, had a secret conversation to try to buy it. I love that when you buy something from Denmark, America, like we bought the Virgin Islands from them in 1917, it's always with gold coins. They won't take a check. They gotta have the
a bag of gold
metal
coins.
Cash on the barrelhead, exactly. And and one of the arguments that Trump makes about the Panama Canal, there are two things going on. One is there's been a lot of concern over the past decade about the growing activity of China in the region. 2 of the 5 ports or whatever they're called that kind of, manage shipping there are owned and run by companies in China. The defenders say, well, they were in Hong Kong. The critics say, yeah, have you seen what's happening in Hong Kong the last 10 years? And this is just part of China is an intractable enemy.
Yep.
And I will just say to everybody in Great Britain, everybody across Europe, pull your head out. There is no way around this. China is coming, and you just got to figure out what you're going to do about it. And so that's part of it, is he wanted to highlight the China stuff. Part of it is, hey, America paid the money, or American companies, they paid the money, they built it, they maintained it, we defend it, the military protection comes from us.
Sure.
And yet we pay the same fees as, China and Great Britain, anyone else. And so his argument is, we deserve better, or the way he puts it is, you're mistreating us, whatever. And then, of course, the third part is Trump's crazy. So you got to always factor that in. It's just the guy. It's just crazy.
Well, there is that, isn't there? I mean, what?
Just let me say this. Which answer is better, though, if you're in a negotiation? Someone says, "Are you willing to take, whatever, military force or economic?" Remember, the question was military force or economic coercion off the table, and Trump gave the exact right answer if you're in a negotiation, which is no. I'm not taking anything off the table.
Yeah.
Now, is he crazy enough to send the military? Would the military even go? Blah, blah, blah. But as far as economic coercion, hey, Denmark, that's a nice trade relationship with America to buy your whatever Denmark. What do they make? Like cheese or whatever? Danishes. Yeah.
Bacon.
Something happened to it.
A lot of bacon coming out of there.
That's true. They are a big ham country. Yes,
they love a bit of ham over there. What is the?
So do we.
What's the history of Greenland here? Michael, maybe you can educate us. I don't know. I mean, it's obviously
America has
not,
one. This is
it's not America's, right?
Right. So this is the big point, I think, that helped me understand it. America's Space Force base, because we now have a Space Force. Because, and look, I mean, it's funny, as silly as it sounds, and people mock Trump for doing it. The fact is, other countries are doing it because that's going to be part of the next war. Absolutely, is going to be our assets in space, like satellites and whatnot. Our Space Force base is in Greenland. We have a base that we lease or whatever, bought, whatever, and it used to be an Air Force base. Now it's a Space Force base. It's top of the world is kind of the nickname for it.
Yeah.
And it's a very strategic point. Also, due to global warming, man-made or otherwise, you can now do more navigation near the pole, which means there's more trade routes, which means there's more financial interest in the world. And so if I'm going to translate Trump into not crazy, the way I would translate is, America is going to spend more time and money defending that part of the globe.
Yeah.
So we're going to be actively doing stuff anyway. I thought it was interesting. Denmark, like after the story broke, there's hey, we're sending some more assets up there too. We got like 4 more, dog sleds and a couple of guys with guns. The fact is, America's going to defend it. America's going to spend money for it. The West needs to protect it, particularly from Russia and China.
Yeah.
So why not turn it into the coldest Virgin Island? Just make it like.
So it's a mood. It's a mood music thing.
Yeah, well, but it's also a acknowledgement. We're doing the work, so why not why not have it be a U.S. territory or whatever quasi thing? Then the other big thing too, of course, is rare earth minerals. China dominates the minerals that you need to make solar panels, make EVs, make high-tech chips, and these geranium and galanium and all this stuff I'd never heard of before a month ago. They are key to our world economy.
Sure.
And once again, China is coming. So what does Trump's Panama, Greenland, what do they have in common? China. There is a real China problem. He's talking crazy, but he's talking in the direction of we've got to do something about China.
What about Canada, though? Because I heard him talk in similar tones about Canada. He talked about, there's a lot of nice people over there. It's a lovely country, but we protect it, essentially. America protects Canada, so you might as well make it part of America.
Any day not spent mocking the Canadians is a lost day. I mean, come on. They're the Canadians. And I don't know what the hell they do up there in Canada, and I'm sure it's a fine country. As you know, Americans are not particularly globally oriented. We don't know a lot about cross the border. In fact, most Americans don't even know that the capital of Canada is Maine. And so, anyway... to be serious,
well, that's what we were taught in school as well. So
once again, to be serious, there are a series of things happening, and this is one that your team has already learned. You trash Trump, you talk about what a racist he is. Your Secretary of Foreign Affairs is out there trashing him.
Yeah.
He's going to remember it. He's not going to like it. Canada and Trudeau and their government, which is very left, has been anti-Trump, trashing Trump for a long time. So that's step one. Step two, we have seen a surge in illegal crossings across the northern border. Now, the raw number is much smaller still than the southern border, but it's up. I think the last number I saw was 1,700% increase during the Biden years, maybe bigger. And what's interesting? Wildly disproportionate, the number of people who are on the terror watch list are coming illegally across the northern border when they're detained.
Interesting.
And what's Canada's stance? Relatively open borders. They don't do any immigration enforcement, so it's kind of like the Mexico problem. So once again, Trump creating leverage on something he cares about and by trashing people.
Just a final story that's worth getting your word on, and I'm just going to give a sort of an odd example of something similar. Over here, it's flu season because it's winter, and every year the front pages go, oh my God, everyone's got flu, and the hospitals can't cope. Similarly, over there in California, there's some wildfires. I tend not to take any news seriously out of California unless there's a wildfire, frankly. They're happening all the time. What makes this different? Why is it more serious this time, Michael?
Well, I don't know that it's more serious, but when you're hitting communities like Malibu and, where the affluent people in L.A. County live, when you're hitting Santa Clarita where my Uncle John lives, hi, Uncle John, then it starts being a thing. But there is something else, which is the governor of California is a far-left environmental guy. And the political debate is over, do you do controlled burns? Do you intentionally destroy in order to, prosper and have a healthier ecosystem? And the crazy greenies are, no burning, no, every time a tree dies, grandma cries, whatever. And so because Gavin Newsom has not allowed the forest management that the forestry people keep saying, now you have these, once again, affluent homes in L.A. County. They're not off in the north part of the state or whatever. It's not out in the central desert, well, not desert, but, the central area where it's a relatively low population. And so the big reason this is a big story is it's happening in a major media market, the second largest media market in the country.
Right.
And it's happening to rich liberals. So if it hurts rich liberals where TV cameras are, it's a big story.
Of course it is. And listen, it's always a big story when you're with us, though, Michael. Thank you, as ever. Michael Graham, US political commentator. He is, of course, the managing editor at Inside Sources. Check them out. He's our man on the Hill. Knows his way around the Washington bloc and beyond. Thank you to him. I tell you what, I cannot tell you how, and this may be a bad thing, I cannot tell you how much I'm looking forward to Donald Trump being in the White House. If for no other reason, you can almost smell it before it happens, the delicious offering of the unfathomable, the quirky, the interesting, the brave, the controversial, whatever you call it. It won't be dull. It will not be dull. It's just a case of how quick the man acts. But I would say pretty darn quick. He's back in the Oval Office in, 2 weeks' time. We'll watch with interest. 0344 499 1000. Jeremy Carl's here after the news at 4, but he will pop in before then to tell us what's going on. This is Talk.
Saturday night, and you lucky people have got 4 of Talk's mightiest personalities in one room. I mean, what could go right? Me, Jeremy Kyle, Michael Graham, Julia, I'm Not Grumpy Tonight, Hartley Brewer and Kev O'Sullivan. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
What are you thinking? Jules is smiling.
I think they've made us all look a lot better than we actually look.
Well, I know what to
ask for next time I go to the hairdresser.
I'd like to talk about Jez's nipples on his...
You got nipples? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You've got nipples.
I didn't think you had nipples. I assumed you just came in an egg.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This from Brad in Cambridge. Starmer says we don't need an inquiry because we have the J report. I don't understand why we can't still implement the J report and hold an independent inquiry and to establish if there should be any legal action against guilty parties. Why does it have to be one or the other? Precisely my point. Bang on, Brad. Thank you for that. David in the Cotswolds. On the question of where do you get your news from, Starmer said today that he had spoken to the victims of the grooming gangs this morning. I don't know, I think he said it this morning. I don't think he'd spoken to them this morning. Maybe he had. Adding they didn't want an inquiry. In that case, I won't be getting my news from Starmer then. He's spoken to all the victims. Did they all come and see him? Or did he call them on the phone? This crime has been going on for 20 years. There's a lot of victims. But he's implied that he spoke to them this morning and has come up with a consensus from that. I think he needs fact-checking. Yes, he did say something like victims don't want it. Well, we've had victims on the phone and representatives of victims, and certainly the ones I've spoken to do want it, absolutely want it, because they think there's quite a lot lacking, still stuff to come out and quite a lot to be exposed. So, yeah, I spotted that too, David. I don't know what he was referring to in that respect, but it's not true. Robert is in Hertfordshire. Robert, what have you got for us? Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Happy New Year, Ian.
And you too.
I despaired yesterday when Starmer used the far right term to get out of jail. He used it. And what I want you to do is just indulge in a little experiment. Yeah. And the experiment is you've got two coins, a 50p coin and a pound coin. Now, the 50p coin represents all the normal people in this country. Okay, now you put that flat on the table. On top, you've got the pound coin that represents the left. Now, you put that on top of the 50p coin. All of a sudden, you move the left one to the left. Now, all of a sudden, that's become right now. The one that was representing all the normal people, yet they haven't moved, their values haven't changed, they now become right. Now, if you move that pound coin further to the left, all of a sudden, by magic, that the normal people one, the 50p, they become far right. And that is it in a nutshell. Their values haven't changed. It's because the left have gone far left. And so the normal people have become far right.
Yeah. I can't believe I haven't heard scholars of politics making the pound coin analogy before, frankly, because
you know what?
That's what we're about.
That's a great one, isn't it? I've had it a couple of years now. I bet I'll put my name to that.
But you're absolutely, you should do, yeah. It'll be known as the Robert theory, we'll call it. But you're spot on, because the further left you go, the more you see everything around you as further right, obviously. And that's a basic truth.
When you think
nothing's changed.
But the left are the minority. The 50p is representing the people who think there's only two sexes. There's only, and the other ones are nutters.
Yeah, but the problem is with the nutters, or with those on what you'd call, I think, reasonably the far left, and this government is appearing to look very much like that for a whole number of reasons. That the reason that you can't convince them of this is because they genuinely believe it, and this is the problem, Robert. It's not like Starmer's going home going, I think I got away with that. He believes this stuff. He believes that people advocating for an inquiry are mostly bandwagon jumpers from the far right, and that is the kind of nonsense we're dealing with. Robert, love it. I will use the pound coin analogy and the 50p one thrown in as well as we move forward. One here comes in from Jerv, who says, when a political party is more concerned with its voter base, and it is the case for all parties in this benighted country, then what hope do we have as a society?
Yeah.
We move slowly towards the corruption and hidden agendas of those medieval societies, says Ian in York. Thank you, Ian.
Can't get away from the fact, welcome to whatever day it is, Wednesday, I cannot get away from the fact that the very essence, I said this to you yesterday, of something as abhorrent as child abuse is playing out in the public sector in political terms about who said what. What about the moral outrage that kids are being raped, right? And if we're talking about the fact that it's Muslim men and we don't want to say that for fear of upsetting it, or we're talking about politicians scoring points, Jess Phillips tweeting. There's a tweet from Jess Phillips in 2015 saying that George Galloway's a rape apologist, which is exactly what she was called by Elon Musk, and she was apparently found absolutely outrageous. I don't understand, as a father, why they're not going, this is fundamentally wrong, and we would track down. You know what I think, though? And I'm beginning to sound like a conspiracy theorist. I think this goes higher and higher and deeper than you could ever imagine in our society.
And also, Keir Starmer is a lawyer and a politician. In your DNA of two of those jobs is the constant ability to want to get to the truth. That you'd think that would be your big instinct.
And what better to turn the public, because he's made more gaffes in 6 months, than go, do you know what? I'll do it. 100%. By not agreeing to it, he makes it look like he's trying to cover up when he was a
He could regain, if he got this one absolutely right, I'd be voting for him at the next... Well, maybe not that far, but you take the point. But he's not going there.
Why, though? Why? Why are we talking about consecutive governments? Why are we talking about different parties? I told a story about the old man. Did I say it to you yesterday?
You did, yeah.
Did you? And to me, I keep saying to people, this has got to go higher and deeper, because fundamentally, if we said it yesterday, if you looked at another country and you said, oh, by the way, paedophilia in this country or whatever it is, you can get away with it.
Yeah, yeah.
We'd say it was abhorrent.
Of course we